Chapter 799. The fire on the dragon tail slope burned the simple inn and the corpses of the soldiers. Su Fengnian squatted at the side and spread his hands lazily to warm himself. Looking at the ashes on the ground, he could not help but think of great ancestor Gu's military book, Ashes. There were 16 volumes, which detailed ancient and modern strategies, the situation of the territory, the importance of public lands, naval warfare, river defense, and many other elements. It first proposed that the land was the foundation of the country's military strategy and gave an incisive overview of the world. Xiangfan was the land of the world, and Bailiang was the land where lions hunted rabbits. In fact, they all came from the same ashes. Secondly, the situation and the imperial government complemented each other, and neither could be missing. Especially the emphasis on the exploration of mountain sand mines, it could be said to be all-encompassing. Li Yishan's vision was very high, and he sincerely admired Ashes, praising it as a new paradise for the military strategists of later generations. Unfortunately, the southern Tang dynasty collapsed, and half of the 16 volumes were confiscated by the national treasury. Most of them were pocketed by Gu Jiantang, and the remaining 8 volumes were scattered among the people. Bailiang only had 3 volumes. When Su Fengnian was young, he was often punished by Li Yishan to copy miscellaneous books. The 3 volumes of Ashes undoubtedly made him suffer a lot. At that time, he would never have thought that today he would be drinking at the same table with the military book's author, and that they would return to Bailiang together. If they met earlier, perhaps his master would have had another drinking buddy. Hu Chuanya stared blankly at this sloppy guy. Not only did he order his retainers to kill the dragon tail slope, he even had the mood to leisurely warm himself by the fire. Why didn't he hurry up and run away? She did not even have a good impression of this guy in white. After escaping from death, she did not even think of thanking him, let alone repaying his kindness. She just felt that he was not pleasing to the eye. It would be nice if she could step on his snow-white body a few times and leave a few black mud marks on the soles of her shoes. However, Hu Chuanya subconsciously glanced at the 9-feet-tall man not far away. It was this person who walked out of the inn. After a few sips of wine, it was completely quiet outside. He dragged the corpse of the Iron Lu City's master archer general into the burning inn like a dead dog. Seeing this, Hu Chuanya, who was hiding in the thatched shed, almost vomited. As for the young Li Huier, who was ignorant of worldly affairs, his eyes were wide open from the beginning to the end, foolishly watching people collect the corpses. He firmly believed that this group of elite armored soldiers had been punished by the heavens, and refused to believe that they had been killed by humans. The hut was not burned down. Great ancestor Gu and Huang Shang stood in the hut and looked to the south together, sighing. Birds of a feather flock together. Ning Zong, Su Zhan, and the woman surnamed Zhou naturally gathered together. The woman took advantage of the fire to retrieve her sword. Her hands were badly mangled, but fortunately, her muscles and bones were not injured. She applied an exclusive golden sore medicine and wrapped it in a clean silk cloth, and did not care about it anymore. No matter if one traveled alone or in a group, gold, silver, and soft goods were a necessity in Jianghu. The delicate bottle to hold the ointment was even more indispensable. The woman surnamed Zhou was not old, but she was already experienced in Jianghu. She relied on herself to reach the 3rd level of strength. For a woman who could not be said to have any family inheritance, it could be said to be a miracle. Hu Chuanya had always been rude when speaking, and this time was no exception. She heartlessly asked a question that made Ning Zong's eyelids tremble. "Will this guy kill us to silence us?" The woman surnamed Zhou put her palm on the sword hilt and remained silent. To a swordsman, a sword was not only a lover's beauty, but also a lover's love. Sometimes, it was also a strict senior. Looking at a sword was like looking at a person, reminding people that Li Chungang once held a wooden horse and ox with a sword. Dong Tai also twisted a peach branch like holding a sword, and the 9 swords of the Wu family held a sword until they died in the wilderness of Beimeng. In Jianghu, there were many sabresmen who turned to swordsmanship, and few swordsmen who turned to other weapons. Practicing swordsmanship from childhood to old age, they stuck to one thing until death. Even if they could not achieve anything in their lifetime, they would not abandon the sword midway. Although Su Zhan's family had declined, a dead camel was still bigger than a horse, and his family was still not thin. His father, Su Dachu, wrote the Observing Skills scripture, which could be said to be a comprehensive collection of staff techniques. When the Su family of Lianghuai was mentioned, even the bandits who disregarded human life would give them a thumbs up. It was only because it was said that when Su Dachu was young, he was fortunate enough to meet the spear immortal Wuxia. At that time, the famous great guru saw that Su Dachu's foundation was not bad, and taught him a secret formula. In the eyes of the Wulin people of Lianghuai, it was tantamount to building a friendship with a real immortal on the earth. It was just that fortune and misfortune came together. After Wuxia was killed by Chen Zhibao, the foundation of the Su family, which had been relying on the spear immortal for many years, began to decline day by day. It was no longer the same as before. Su Dachu died depressed, and Su Zhan was used to seeing the fickleness of human nature, so his temperament became colder. Compared to Hu Chuanya's pure disgust, which came from instinct, Su Zhan had a few more hidden feelings of jealousy and reverence for that enigmatic young master. However, he did not want to be noticed by Zhou Qinghuai, so he was suffocating. Zhou Qinghuai said calmly, "I only heard that Master Huang will not be going to the capital for the time being, and will be going to Shangyin Academy to visit a friend. I don't trust this group of people, so I will accompany them. Uncle Ning and young Master Su, what do you plan to do?" Chapter 800. Ning Zong shook his head. He didn't dare to puff himself up at his own cost. More than 100 of his soldiers had died and all his belongings were there. He had to hurry back to remedy the situation. Since Sir Huang was safe for the time being, Ning Zong wasn't so chivalrous that he didn't care about the survival of his family. Ning Zong didn't hide it and said directly, "Qin Hu, I can't go to Shangyin Academy with such a big thing happening." Su Zhan said in a low voice, "Uncle Ning, don't worry. I'll do my best to protect Sir Huang with Qin Hu." Ning Zong was relieved and patted Su Zhan's shoulder. Hu Chuanya said excitedly, "Sister Zhou, young Master Su, you can come to my house." Ning Zong smiled. The reason why he had brought this girl along this time was partly because she had insisted on joining them, and partly because Ning Zong had a plan in mind. Hu Chuanya was the only daughter of the Kaisher Mountain's master. The Kaisher Mountain had a high prestige in the Lianhuai region, and was second to none in the Jiujiang region. Zhao Hongdan of the Kaisher Mountain wielded the drunken sword, and when she sparred with others, she liked to drink. The more intoxicated she was, the better her swordsmanship would be, and it was rare for her to meet a worthy opponent. She had the strength of level 3, which was equivalent to one of the 6 assistant ministers in Jianghu. Hu Chuanya didn't follow Zhao Hongdan's surname because the real master of the Kaisher Mountain was Zhao Hongdan's wife, Hu Xianxia. She was a famous tigress. Hu Chuanya's grandfather was an elder of the southern Tang dynasty who had retired from Jiujiang. During the Spring and Autumn War, he had led thousands of soldiers. He was ruthless and killed people like flies. Zhao Hongdan was considered to have married into the Hu family of the Kaisher Mountain. After hastily burying the old servant who had served Sir Huang for many years, Ning Zong cupped his hands and bid farewell to everyone at the bottom of the Dragon Tail slope. He rode straight to the south while Duan Chun, and rode to the north to report. Previously, Yuan Zhuozong deliberately left a few war horses behind and did not send them to the king of Hell's palace. Now they came in handy. Su Zhan, Zhou Qinghu, Hu Chuanya, and Su Fengyan, great ancestor Gu, Yuan Zhuozong, rode 2 carriages. Huang Chang and the young man, Li Huai, rode in the same carriage. Lu Song was the coachman of this carriage, while the kamikaze warrior, Wu, drove the other carriage. Wang Lin was unwilling to sit in the carriage, so he sat behind the young man and muttered, saying that the woman surnamed Zhou's buttocks were like the full moon, and her eyebrows were raised. Not only was she good at giving birth, but she was also a seductive beauty. After he brought her into his family, she would definitely give birth to a large nest of babies. Ever since Wu left the Shenwu city, he had been arguing with Wang Lin. Now that they were talking about a woman's figure, they were on the same side for the first time. This was how children were. They were the most unwilling to show weakness on this topic. They were afraid that they would be treated as a fledgling who had never tasted meat. They had just left the Dragon Tail slope and had not yet turned into the courier road when a group of people blocked their way. There were about 20 of them, and their momentum was very domineering. These 20 riders were wearing a variety of clothes. There was an enchanting woman wearing a colorful thin gown in the winter, and a handsome and delicate young man nestled in her arms. There was a boorish man who was bare-chested and had a live snake as his belt. There was an old man in brocade who was dozing off. His head was nodding like a chicken pecking at rice. There was a handsome young man who was holding a folding fan and wearing a fox fur coat. There was an iron tower giant who was 10 feet tall and held a copper ball in his hand. There was also a dwarf who was jumping around. He was standing on a tall horse that did not match his body size. His big robe was almost dragging on the ground. He was so bizarre that people would think that they had fallen into the ghost city of Fengdu. Hu Chuanya looked on with a sluggish expression. This time he really hit the nail on the head. He had seen a ghost during the day. Su Zhan and Zhou Qinghu's gazes met, and they both saw a trace of horror in each other's eyes. Although the 20 riders were blocking the path, their positions were very clear. The two of them recognized the rider at the back, a bald man with a scarred head like a monk. However, he was wearing a rare Taoist robe that was neither from Mount Longhu nor Mount Wudong. On his shoulder stood a gorgeous parrot. This person could be considered the #1 great calamity in the Jianghu of the two rivers. He killed people as he pleased. Even Master Liang had suffered a great loss under his hands. At that time, Chaosher Mountain was angry that a woman in the volcano had been humiliated to death by him. They did not hesitate to mobilize all of their forces, mobilizing 100 light cavalry servants. However, even Zhou Bao and Zhou Qinghu were unable to do anything about it. However, this kind of troublesome devil was only stopped at the back of the 20 riders. Everywhere in the Jianghu, one's seniority was determined by how much strength one possessed. If one's strength was not up to par, one would have to obediently sit on the side. However, they were unable to succeed. The leader of the 20 riders kept a distance behind them. He was a sturdy man with an ordinary appearance. Whether it was his appearance or adornment, he was not eye-catching. Behind him, a coquettish woman in a colorful thin dress clicked her tongue and pretended to be surprised. Ghosts wailed and wolves howled at the Dragon Tail slope, and more than 100 bowls of Mengpo's soup were handed out on the Bridge of Helplessness. This young master's skills are not inferior to our devil sect. Su Fengnian frowned. Devil sect. 60 years ago, the great immortal Qi Xuanzhen had single-handedly wiped out 6 devil sect celestial demons on the devil-slaying platform. It was earth-shattering. Since then, the devil sect, which was at its peak, had been unable to recover. Like a rat crossing the street, they only dared to act sneakily. How did they manage to gather such a large group of disciples and disciples today? Could it be that they were trying to recruit him into the devil sect? Could it be that after hearing that Hong Shixiang, the reincarnation of Qi Xuanzhen, had committed suicide, these guys really thought that it was time for them to make a comeback? Su Fengnian gently squeezed the horse's belly, and the horse's hooves were light. He asked with a smile, "What? You want me to be the leader of your devil sect? You have good taste." Chapter 801. Hearing Su Fengnian's arrogant words, the woman was like a fox demon coming out of an ancient temple deep in the mountain. Her delicate hand pushed away the pale green youth in her bosom, who was as handsome as a woman. She held her chest and pretended to be resentful. Her charming eyes were like silk as she said, "Nujia doesn't mind Gongzi becoming the cult leader, but Nujia's words carry little weight. I can't keep my word." Su Fengnian's horsemanship was exquisite. Even if he did not wave the whip with both hands in his sleeves, the warhorse still stopped as if it had a tacit understanding. With a mocking smile he asked, "Your devil cult has dominated the Jianghu for 100 years, but your vitality was greatly damaged by Qi Xuanzhen alone. For the last several decades you have been like a stray dog. I heard that even the second-rate schools dare to ride on your head and defecate and piss. What good will it do for me to be the cult leader who doesn't live up to the name? Don't tell me I have to pay for your basic necessities? Look, your auntie can't even afford to buy thick clothes. And that poor man holding the copper ball, his upper body is bare. And then there's that parrot behind him, Let me see, its breed is not good. It's a primrose that costs only several hundred taels of silver. If it were me, if I wasn't the Shifei, who can't be bought with 100 taels of gold, how could I have the face to roam the Jianghu? Hu Chuanya rolled her eyes and angrily said, "This fellow really doesn't know life from death. He's a jinx. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have run into this group of big devil heads." The fox-like woman who was called Auntie smiled sweetly and sweetly said, "Auntie is too poor to wear warm clothes, but don't I still have you, Gongzi? Let's go back and find a mandarin duck brocade quilt to cover ourselves. We'll be honest with each other and snuggle for warmth." Hu Chuanya, whose face was flushed, spat with all her strength, "What a shameless slut." The handsome youth in the woman's bosom seemed to have knocked over a jar of vinegar, but without waiting for him to speak, the plump woman quietly stretched out her hand and dug her nails into his cheek. The pain was so severe that he immediately kept quiet out of fear. The woman was looking at Su Fengnian with a face full of spring, but as soon as she turned her gaze, she quickly turned to glare at the young girl Hu Chuanya with a cold, murderous intent. She lifted her sleeves and rolled up a strand of hair on her temples. A beautiful butterfly appeared in front of Hu Chuanya's eyes. The young girl was pleasantly surprised, but without thinking, she wanted to grab this adorable plaything with her fingers. However, Zhou Qinghu, who was beside her, quickly pulled out his Qinghong sword and slashed the butterfly into two halves. However, the butterfly that should have died did not fall to the ground. Instead, one died and the other two came back to life, turning into two butterflies that fluttered their wings and pounced towards the young girl. Only now did Hu Chuanya realize the severity of the situation and hurriedly reined in the horse to retreat. Zhou Qinghu's expression was grave. He changed from slashing to slapping. The sword collided with the butterfly, unexpectedly producing two muffled, ping sounds. The butterfly did not die, it bounced back several feet and leisurely returned. The woman laughed so hard that her chest shook violently. She looked more and more like a fox spirit that had cultivated into a spirit. She reminded with a smile, "This maiden who uses a sword, even if an ordinary sword can cut through iron like mud, it can't kill the laughing silly butterfly that I've carefully raised. If it's not a Taoist sword, don't waste your energy. A good girl like you shouldn't practice the sword. Don't you know that all the men in the world have swords hanging on their waists? That sword is the real good sword. Alas, it's a pity that you haven't tasted it and don't know how powerful it is. After tasting it a few times, you'll definitely feel like dying. You'll tactfully beg for mercy and willingly admit defeat." The woman turned her head to look at Su Fengnian and asked, "Young master, don't you think so?" The leader of the horsemen said flatly, "Enough." The woman playing with the butterfly immediately shut her mouth. The horseman who had the least presence of an expert in the devil cult looked at Su Fengnian and said, "I'm Lu Linggei, the right protector of the so-called devil cult. This time, I'm under the orders of the cult leader to welcome young master into the cult." Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Zhulu Mountain has been without a leader for more than 60 years. How come there's a new master? The Zhulu Mountain is like a temple, with 2 kings and 4 dukes and marquises. The 6 of them have always boasted of being external demons, and you protectors are merely lackeys who serve them tea and water. It seems like the Zhulu Mountain's sincerity is not enough." Lu Linggei, the devil cult's protector, did not get angry. He said calmly, "As long as young master enters the mountain, you can be directly conferred the title of Marquis if nothing unexpected happens. As long as you make a great contribution to Zhulu Mountain in the future, the day of being conferred the title of King is just around the corner." It seemed that this was the first time that the horsemen behind Lu Linggui heard about this. When they looked at Su Fengnian again, their eyes were filled with sincere envy and respect. Even the old man in brocade clothes who was dozing off suddenly opened his eyes. When the devil cult was at its peak, it was rumored that there were 30,000 people. There were many talents and experts. It was said that they could compete with a small country. The Jianghu 60 years ago was the history of the righteous faction fighting with Zhulu Mountain to the death. Almost 70 to 80% of the Wulin Alliance chiefs in history died in the hands of the devil cult. After one died, another was elected, one after another. Later, this popular position became a chicken rib that all the Jianghu people knew well. Chao Changqing's drunken shouting and taking off his boots, Li Chuangong's sword, Dong Tai's donkey riding to see the world, and Wang Xianji's second in the world. These outstanding figures gave the younger generation the feeling that there were so many beauties in Jianghu. Every time they thought about it, their minds would waver. As for the big and small demons involved with Zhulu Mountain, they seemed to have a lot of bad deeds. They either drank people's hearts and livers, plucked yin to nourish yang, or killed an entire family with a snap of their fingers. This was especially true for the past leaders of Zhulu Mountain and the 6 sky demons. It seemed that it wasn't enough to dominate Jianghu. They also wanted to conquer the world. When the Central Plains lost the deer, all the heroes in the world would chase after it. This was the meaning of Zhulu Mountain. When Su Xiao led the Iron Horse into Jianghu, the target of his attack was Zhulu Mountain, which was shrouded in clouds and fog. It was said that the mountain had been accumulating gold and silver for hundreds of years. It was so rich that it could rival a country. Unfortunately, the Bailiang cavalry stopped at Dragon Tiger Mountain. Su Fengnian was absent-minded for a while, so the spirit turtle didn't rush him. However, the brute with the bronze ball who was ridiculed by Su Fengnian didn't have the leisure to wait for the cold in the winter. He raised his palm high above his head and lifted the huge bronze ball weighing hundreds of kilograms. He shouted angrily and threw it at the pretty boy with a disgusting smile. The bronze ball was as heavy as a mountain. Yuan Zhuozong rushed out with an iron spear in his right hand. He waved his left hand and easily knocked away the bronze ball. 1 man, 1 horse and 1 spear galloped forward. The spirit turtle was a little annoyed and didn't care about Yuan Zhuozong's ability to knock away the heavy bronze ball. But when he rushed forward with a spear in his hand, the spirit turtle became serious. The woman who was playing with butterflies was the first to dodge. Obviously, she didn't want to join in the fun. The spirit turtle wanted to test the white-haired young man's real strength. After a little hesitation, it reined its horse and dodged. The other horses did the same. So, only Yuan Zhuozong was left to confront the man who lost the bronze ball. The brute sneered to boost his courage. The muscles in his arms swelled up like dragons. He was about to grab the spear with his bare hands. However, the next moment, his body was suspended in the air. The spear penetrated the brute's strong body. Not only that, but the huge force also knocked him off the horse and lifted him in the air. The strong brute fell to the ground and died. Yuan Zhuozong with the spear turned his horse around in the encirclement of the demons. No one dared to provoke him. Hu Chuanya opened her mouth in horror. That's it? Shouldn't the demons beat the white-haired young man until he was rolling on the ground? Su Zhan's eyes were strange. There was an ancient saying in Jianghu that said 3 parts of the stick technique and 7 parts of the spear. The stick, and the spear were all connected. Generally speaking, the spear was a line, and the circle was wonderful. The stick could hit a large area, and it was like torrential rain. Su Zhan had been immersed in the stick technique for many years. His father's generation was famous in this area. For the casual spear of Yuan Zhuozong, there was nothing unusual about it. However, Su Zhan knew the meaning of this spear. It was the peak state of the observing skill scripture of his father, Su Dachu. People who practiced martial arts were always confused by the dense and complicated moves in the secret manuals. However, once they crossed the threshold and broke through the paper window, it became easier and easier to understand. There was no need to memorize many words, and there was no need to use hundreds of fancy moves. When a master faced an enemy, life and death were often decided. The living would have a bad reputation, and the dead would be reincarnated. The spirit turtle was indifferent to the dead man. He praised indifferently, "No wonder you are known as the most powerful General Yuan Baixiong on the spring and autumn horse." Yuan Zhuozong pulled the spear and retreated slowly. He was unparalleled. Even Hu Chuanya, a girl who was obsessed with insignificant things, was in a trance. He was so cool and unrestrained. She continued to curse in her heart. It was really a pity that such a valiant hero was actually a servant of someone who only knew how to talk fast. Su Fengnian laughed. Fortunately, Wang Xiaoping of Wudong is not here. Otherwise, none of you can leave. As he spoke, a middle-aged Taoist with a brand new peach-wood sword appeared behind the 20 riders. After the battle in Divine Martial Arts City, the elusive Wudong sword maniac had set up a formation as if he was the aureole behind the mantis. Su Fengyan laughed shamelessly. I said I was a jinx. Sure enough, it comes true every time. The Taoist was 1 foot tall, and the devil was 10 feet tall. But today, the Taoist was 3,000 feet tall. Chapter 802. With Yuan Zhuozong and Wang Xiaoping at the back, the people of Zhulu Mountain were all cultivators. Most of them had lost the will to fight. The beautiful woman saw that the situation was not good, so she decisively took back the pair of colorful butterflies. The butterflies flew around her and returned to her sleeves. The world recognized Wudong's Shintu sword and Gu Jiantang's Nanhua saber as the #1 talisman weapon in the world. Gu Jiantang was in the center of the imperial court and was just an unreachable statue in Jianghu. Wang Xiaoping was different, especially for devils like women who studied unorthodox methods. She was the bane of their lives. Playing witchcraft in front of Wang Xiaoping was like courting death. Wang Xiaoping's talisman sword could break 10,000 spells. But the land spirit turtle and several other powerful figures in Zhulu Mountain did not lose their color even when they saw the Wudong sword maniac. The land spirit turtle was even more calm and said softly, Zhulu Mountain is waiting for you at the foot of the dragon tail slope. We only want to welcome you to be conferred the title of Marquis. We don't want to provoke you. The reason why we have gathered so many people is that we are worried that you will think that Zhulu Mountain is not sincere enough. The spirit tortoise, who was not good with words, was carefully weighing its words when it was interrupted by Hu Chuanya's crisp laughter. However, this time, Zhou Qinghu and the others did not blame the little girl too much. The scene in front of them was simply too unexpected. The nearly 20 riders behind the spirit tortoise also reacted and whispered among themselves. Su Fengyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The Wudong Taoist with the peachwood sword on his back came in a hurry, leaving everyone aside. Probably because he didn't like Su Fengyan's pretense, Su Fengyan, who had his hands in his sleeves, casually raised his cuffs and wiped his cheeks. This vulgar action caused the woman's delicate body to sway. The handsome young man in her arms with a gentle face hated Su Fengyan even more for taking all the limelight. Su Fengyan was in a good mood today and did not mind these people from the devil cult blocking his way. He said, if Zhulu Mountain is sincere, ask your hierarch to come and see me in person. Otherwise, there is no need to talk. Conferred the title of Marquis? I can't believe you have the guts to take it out. Those demons, who had been prejudiced by their first impressions, were used to sitting on a mountain and watching the world. At this moment, they also remembered that the young man in front of them would one day become the king of Bailiang. The vassal kings of Liang were powerful and influential. Who could defeat the king of Bailiang? This time, Deer Chasing Mountain was indeed a little petty. Lu Lingge was truly a good-tempered clay bodhisattva. He did not object to the request, but a strange smile appeared on his lips. I was fortunate enough to meet Sect Master in the mountain. Sect Master once said that he had some connections with you, young master. Since that's the case, I dare not act on my own. I'll return to the mountain to meet Sect Master and pass on your request. Su Fengyan smiled and asked, from your tone, it sounds like your cult master has a great background? Spirit Tortoise Lu said calmly, I don't dare to lie, but I can tell you the truth. Sect Master took only half a day to reach the top of the mountain. He slaughtered the original 2 kings and 4 dukes. At this time, Deer Chasing Mountain has already recruited 4 first-level masters and half of the mysterious Finger Vajra. Aside from me coming to welcome you, there are 2 other groups of people welcoming people into the mountain. Sect Master even went to West Chu's Chao Changqing in person, asking this Confucian saint to be the senior guest of Deer Chasing Mountain. Su Fengyan was dumbfounded as if he had heard a heavenly book. He mocked, then why didn't your sect master just make Wang Xianji the vice sect master and then make Dong Tai the senior guest? Then he could swallow the Wu family's sword tomb and dominate the martial arts world. Who would dare to oppose him? That's what you call awe-inspiring. Spirit Tortoise Lu said methodically, I'll pass on your suggestion to Sect Master. Su Fengyan imitated a young girl and chuckled, which could be considered as an order to leave. Spirit Tortoise Lu was quite efficient. He did not waste any more words and turned his horse around to leave with his people. The scantily clad beautiful woman didn't forget to glance back and smile. Su Fengnian stood there in a daze. He didn't care much about the devils of Deer-Chasing Mountain, whose strength couldn't be underestimated. However, he was a bit wary of the cult master who was like a flood dragon in the clouds. Although Su Fengnian didn't believe Spirit Tortoise Lu's words at all, he didn't lower his guard at all. Deer-Chasing Mountain had stood in Jianghu for 800 years. The catastrophe 60 years ago wasn't the most tragic in the history of the demonic cult. 100 years ago, almost all the sword immortals, except for Ancestor Lu, who was the first in 500 years, had gone to Deer-Chasing Mountain and killed a lot of people. In each dynasty, the founders were mostly talented and wise, and their successors were not too far behind. Occasionally, there would be a Lord of Resurgence who would turn the tide, but he could only prolong the dynasty's reign. However, there were a total of 9 cult leaders of Deer-Chasing Mountain, including the previous Lu Songtao. All of them were the overlords of Jianghu who were only one step away from Wang Xianji. The cult leader's seat would be left empty for decades rather than for a mediocre person to sit on. Whoever became the cult leader, no matter how unknown they were outside of Deer-Chasing Mountain, would definitely be an extraordinary figure. Take Lu Songtao for example. After he suffered qi deviancy derangement, he left Deer-Chasing Mountain and killed more than 10,000 people. This caused the Jianghu and the imperial court to feel uneasy and try their best to stop him. However, it was all to no avail. In the 9 kingdoms of spring and autumn, Lu Songtao had killed 2 emperors. One of them was dismembered by Lu Songtao on the dragon throne, while the other lost his head on the dragon bed for no apparent reason. The number of officials, generals, and ministers in the Central Plains was uncountable. It was rumored that in the end, the divine master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, Zhao Gusu, personally went to the Dragon Lake and sacrificed 6 purple golden lotuses. She used the power of a celestial to engrave the prophecy of the 9 words and killed Lu Songtao from thousands of miles away. The outstanding people of the same generation as Lu Songtao, be it the sword immortals or the people of the 3 sects, without exception, did not attain immortality. It was probably because the will of heaven was angry that it did not do anything, so the gate of heaven was closed for 20 years. Su Fengnian laughed at himself. A few years ago, he liked to listen to stories of people like Lu Songtao the most. When he really thought that he had rolled back and forth in the mud a few times, he no longer envied him. Lu Songtao flew all day long and could not be killed by hundreds of slashes. What kind of Jianghu people were they? They were all immortals. Su Fengnian shook his head slightly and shook off his messy thoughts. He did not want to think about the Zhulu Mountain or the hierarch. He pulled out his sleeve and made a gesture to move forward. Great Ancestor Gu, who had demanded an exorbitant price for the position of commander of the Bailiang infantry, followed quietly. The 2 of them walked side by side. The old man, who was no longer lethargic, laughed softly and said, "Your Highness, I shamelessly asked you for a troublesome official position. Please don't take it seriously. Now, I know what the Bailiang cavalry lacks and what they need. I won't cause you any trouble." Su Fengnian did not puff himself up at his own cost. He nodded and said, "Previously, I let the Huaihua great general Zhong Hangu take off his armor and return home. My actions were not honorable. It would not be easy to immediately make a move on Yanwenwan, even if Su Shao personally made a move, let alone me. But please rest assured, General Gu. The position of the deputy commander of the infantry will definitely be yours." Great Ancestor Gu laughed and asked, "I, Great Ancestor Gu, have some fame in naval warfare. As the deputy commander of the infantry, aren't you afraid that Yanwenwan, who has outstanding military achievements, will push you aside and make you lose face? Even you, the one who recommended him, will be disgraced?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "On the surface, it seems that Yanwenwan has the right time, place, and people. However, when I first traveled the Jianghu, there was a saying on the inn's wall, 'The one who stands at the top cannot sit for too long.' Don't rely on a moment of pride to cover the future. Yanwenwan has cultivated his direct descendants for 20 years, resulting in a pool of stagnant water. This person seems to be at the peak of his power. His words carry weight in the Bailiang infantry, but in fact he is not really an iron bucket. In the officialdom, a local snake has its advantages, and a dragon that crosses the river also has its advantages. Besides, if Yen Wenwan's table manners are too ugly and he really wants to lose face with a hedonistic son like me, I will take advantage of this situation and let him accompany Zhong Hongwu to enjoy his grandchildren. Great Ancestor Gu turned his head and glanced at the carriage that Huang Shang was in. He sighed and said, "If Huang Shang is a foolish but loyal scholar, he will not go to Bailiang." Chapter 803. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "The descendants of Bailiang's generals are the so-called descendants of generals. Other than some second- and third-class families, very few families let their descendants go to the border to live a military life. The commander of the cavalry, Zhong Hongwu, did not let Zhong Qingxin join the army. First, he didn't want to cut off the family line. Second, he had a sinister eye. He believed that the military had ruled for 20 years and had accumulated a lot of corruption. In the end, it would be a civil official who was familiar with politics to take over. But these years, the imperial court has been waving its hoe vigorously and sparing no effort in poaching people. In the past, it was Yan Jieshi who became a relative of the imperial family. Following that, it was Jin Lanting who gained power. Now, it was the great scholar Yao Baifeng who entered the capital to become an official. Actually, to me, it doesn't matter how much ability Huang Shang, who is about to go to the capital and enter Taiwan, has. The key is that he is willing to go to Bailiang to become an official. That's enough. The imperial court has disgusted Bailiang for 20 years. In the future, the tables will turn. Hearing this, Great Ancestor Gu laughed heartily. Some of the tentative moves he had made in his heart also disappeared at this moment. The white-haired boy was so young, but he was already so generous. Why should he, an old man, be so narrow-minded? Perhaps it was because after the soldiers of Longwei Slope intercepted them and the devil cult blocked their way, the group walked unusually calmly. They steadily approached Kaisher Mountain. Before entering the mountain, there was a wine stall by the side of the road. When the old wine seller saw Hu Chuanya, it was as if he had seen his own daughter. He refused to pay for the wine and took out good wine to greet the group. Hu Chuanya didn't put on any airs and personally poured wine for Huang Darren, Su Zhan, Zhou Qinghu, and the others. As for Su Fengnian and his group of people, she ignored them. Su Fengnian didn't have a good impression of this unruly woman. At this moment, he thought that no matter how annoying a woman was, she still had a soft heart. Perhaps Hu Chuanya would never know that her most likable moment was not when she wore heavy makeup to get married or when she was high-spirited in Jianghu. Maybe it was this kind of insignificant frown and smile. Su Fengnian sat and drank. Great Ancestor Gu drank a bowl of wine and was in high spirits. He looked up at the mountain and saw the green after the snow melted. He said loudly, "Heaven and earth don't care, but the wine does." Huang Shang drank it all in one gulp. He wiped his mouth and smiled. It doesn't matter if it's good or not. Su Fengnian didn't join in the fun. He just smiled and clinked bowls with Yuan Zuozong and took a sip. It was reasonable that Kaisher Mountain was far away from the downtown area. The 40 miles of road into the mountain was narrow and difficult to pass. Otherwise, it would have been suppressed by the government. However, the next 20 miles gave people a feeling of suddenly opening up. The road was paved with large bluestone slabs, which could allow 3 carriages to drive side by side. It could be seen that Kaisher Mountain was very rich. The road was surrounded by green mountains and clear waters. Hu Chuanya was talking in a low voice with a middle-aged man who had a high position on the mountain. She turned her head and pointed at Su Fengnian from time to time. The man's face was deep and his eyes were fierce. Obviously, he didn't have a good impression of this uninvited guest. Su Zhan and Zhou Qinghu naturally didn't want to make trouble. However, in Kaisher Mountain, Hu Chuanya was a well-deserved golden branch and jade leaf. Su Zhan could remind her, but he didn't want to. Zhou Qinghu wanted to say something, but he knew it was not appropriate. For a moment, the atmosphere on the road was a little strange. As more and more people came to greet Hu Chuanya, dozens of riders galloped. Their momentum was not inferior to the soldiers on the Dragon Tail slope. The voices of young lady rose one after another, which made Hu Chuanya proud. especially when a green-robed swordsman with an elegant look rode down the mountain alone and appeared in her sight. Xianxia's eyes were wet as if she had been greatly wronged. The swordsman with a good temperament was like a man in his 40s. The older he was, the more popular he was. There was an ancient long sword at his waist with 2 hanging tassels. In addition to the sword, there was also an eye-catching wine pot. The green-robed man bent down on the horse and patted his daughter's head lovingly. Then he cupped his fists and bowed to the crowd. Su Zhan and Zhou Qinhu, the 2 juniors, hurriedly bowed back respectfully. Kaisha Mountain was rich and had a lot of people. They roamed Jianghu alone and couldn't afford to offend them. Relying on friends outside, especially nameless soldiers roaming Jianghu, was the same principle as a young scholar hoping to make a name for himself in the literary world. They all paid attention to the fact that many hands picked up firewood to make a name for themselves. It was a blessing to be able to form a good relationship. One's reputation depended on one's own efforts and even more so on the support of seniors. Zhao Hongdan, who had married into Kaisha Mountain, knew his daughter's character. She didn't seem to believe in the slandering words at all. Instead, she paid special attention to Su Qi. When he went up the mountain, he took the initiative to rein in his horse and said gently, "Xianxia is still young. Thanks to young Master Su for taking care of her on this trip. I hope young Master Su can be frank with me on this visit to Kaisha Mountain. Since we've met, we're all brothers and can treat Kaisha Mountain as our home." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Su Qi has been famous in Quarry Mountain for a long time. Hero Zhao's 96 drunken swordsmanship is even more well-known in Jianghu." Su Qi was really a little nervous before entering the mountain this time. "After meeting Hero Zhao, I can finally relax." Zhao Hongdan laughed heartily and repeated the compliment a few times. On the sunny side of the mountain, there was a continuous stretch of secluded small buildings with bamboo groves. The scenery was elegant and elegant. It was for the guests of Kaisha Mountain to stay. The small buildings were built with small water bamboos. It was warm in winter and cool in summer. Most of the furniture in the buildings were also made with bamboo. There were bamboo flutes, bamboo beds, bamboo tables, and even some bamboo root carvings that were made by masters. Zhao Hongdan personally helped the group settle down. Only then did he bring his daughter, Xianxia, up the mountain to meet the real owner of Kaisha Mountain. After leaving the building, Su Fengnian walked along a stone path into the bamboo groves. There were wooden fences on both sides of the path. Along the path, there were large red lanterns hanging on the bamboo groves. Presumably, after the sky turned yellow, the lights stretched out in 2 continuous lines. It was a rare and beautiful scene. Su Fengnian walked and walked until he arrived in front of an ancient temple. The spring water gurgled. The ancient temple was worshipped by the Hu family of Kaisha Mountain. It probably wasn't open to visitors outside the mountain. There was a plaque with the words, "Multicolored Zen Temple," written on it. The couplet on the door was also very interesting. "If you don't turn back, who will save you? If you can change your mind, why do you need my mercy? Turn back." Su Fengnian smiled. He wanted to turn around and go back to his residence. The otherworldly item in the red robe appeared next to him. After recuperating for a while, its 2 faces had mostly recovered. However, its 6 arms had turned into 5, which made it look even more strange. Su Fengnian didn't want to enter the temple, but he didn't want to hurry back either. He walked to the brook outside the temple and squatted on a big rock, listening to the murmuring of the brook. The man and the otherworldly item were in a peaceful state of mind. The otherworldly item lowered its head and saw that Shi Yan's boots were stained with mud. It reached out and gently peeled it off. Su Fengnian smiled. "Don't clean it up. It will get dirty when we go back." However, the otherworldly item was still tirelessly doing this quiet and trivial task. A child's ear-piercing scream came from behind them. "Ghost! Ghost!" A group of well-dressed children were carrying bamboo baskets and hoes to dig winter bamboo shoots. They had harvested something in the bamboo forest. At this moment, they suddenly saw a woman in red who could turn her face around. Of course, they would think that she was a wild ghost hiding in the bamboo forest. "Don't be afraid. This is the temple. Let's smash that ghost to death together." "Yeah, Dad said that evil can't prevail over good. Ghosts are most afraid of the sound of chanting in the temple. Let's smash it while reciting the 1,000-character classic. When a slightly older boy shouted, he threw the hoe in his hand fiercely. The other children echoed and followed suit. The children in the quarry mountain could use medicine to strengthen their bodies at a young age. Their strength was much greater than ordinary children's. 7 or 8 hoes were thrown toward the brook. The few girls who were crying also gathered their courage. Their arm strength was relatively weak, so they couldn't throw their hoes to the stream bank. They began to recite the 1,000-character classic that almost all private schools would make their children memorize when they entered the school. After throwing the hoes, none of them hit the target. The boys began to bend down to pick up lighter stones. Unfortunately, for some reason, whether it was the hoes or the stones, their trajectories were changed. They lost their accuracy and fell around the white-headed ghost and the red-dressed ghost. The children weren't as timid as they were at the beginning. The more they fought, the braver they became. Even the most timid children began to laugh and throw stones as fun. After throwing all the stones around, they switched to the winter bamboo shoots in the bamboo baskets. Su Fengnian's arm was tightly gripped by it. That was why he didn't turn his head. "Let's go. Let's call Mom and Dad to beat the ghost," a boy ordered. A little girl glanced at the otherworldly item in the red robe with disdain. She said with disdain, "Ugly. It's really a ghost." She called it an ugly monster. Perhaps it was better than all of Han Diaoxi's fierce methods outside Shenwu City. Su Fengnian was about to speak when he turned his head and saw that other than one of its arms tightly gripping his arm, its other 4 arms were cupping the 2 faces of joy and compassion. Its fingers were like hooks that seeped with blood. It was as if it wanted to tear off their faces. He gently raised his hand and pulled down her fingers bit by bit. He looked at the brook and wrapped his arm around her shoulder, letting her head rest on his shoulder. Her eye sockets were bleeding, for streams of blood and tears blurred her 2 cheeks. Su Fengnian murmured, "Su Ying, how can you be so beautiful? When I was outside Shenwu City, before I borrowed the spring and autumn sword, I thought, it's not bad to die with you." Her face was crying for joy and her face was smiling for compassion. Chapter 804. The sun was setting in the west. At the peak of Mount Lantua, there was a mound of soil that had been used as a prison for almost 40 years. Suddenly, a golden light shone from it, as if a clay bodhisattva had cracked open, revealing an invincible golden body. Other than this mound of soil, there was an old monk sitting cross-legged on the ground, wearing a tattered kasaya. He was old, his snow-white eyebrows drooping down to his knees. He spun around on the ground, exposed to the sun and wind, causing his skin to be dark and wrinkled. It was like a dried-up field, making his white eyebrows look even paler. When he saw the mound of soil loosening and dirt falling to the ground, it was almost imperceptible. However, in the ears of this Tantric Buddhism Dharmaraja, it was as if thunder was ringing in his ears. His long eyebrows fluttered in the wind, and his body became as still as a mountain. As a great monk of Mount Lantua who claimed to have never lied in his life, he and another senior monk had been taking turns to wait here for more than 20 years. The white-browed old monk stood up and lowered his head submissively. He saw the debris falling down continuously and golden light radiating from his body. The immortal was revealed. At this moment, Mount Lantua was suddenly filled with the chanting of sutras. The mountain appeared even more majestic and dignified under the chanting. The old monk facing the east looked back to the west, and the sun was setting. He did not know if it was an illusion, but the mound of soil was like a sleeping lion that finally stopped napping. After opening its eyes, it shook off the dust and began to swallow the mountains and rivers. The afterglow lit up, and compared to the radiance of the sun in the sky, the brilliance was not inferior at all. Mahavairakana. The elderly Dharmaraja slowly turned his head, and an old monk who seemed to have returned to the world of the living appeared in his vision. Compared to the white-browed old monk who was more than 100 years old, he was even older and more muddle-headed. He was withered and skinny, and probably did not even weigh 90 jin. Such a physique could be said to be extremely weak. Although Mount Lantua did not advocate martial arts, The senior monks of the past, like the six-jeweled guru who was only his junior, were not weak in terms of cultivation base. Bodhisattvas lowered their brows and benevolence, and at the same time, they could subdue dragons and elephants. In the white-browed monk's vision, the old monk was silent and lifeless. Esoteric Buddhism had always been regarded as heretical by the central plains of the eastern land. In the final analysis, it was the Confucianism and Taoism that held grudges against each other. Now that the Liang dynasty and Beimang had almost wiped out Buddhism at the same time, it was actually Zen Buddhism that was destroyed. However, the white-browed old monk wanted to see the general trend after this catastrophe of Buddhism. He could not do it himself, so he could only pin his hopes on the pure clean lion in front of him who had made a great vow to not only become Buddha himself but also to make all the people become Buddhas. The withered old monk finally opened his mouth. Before he spoke, he slowly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air like gray smoke. The filth in one's body and mind is like a glass bottle that can be broken with a hammer. But all living beings have 1,000,000 glass bottles, and the hammer is in the east. The white-browed old monk's expression changed as he clasped his palms together and chanted, "From west to east, if I don't enter hell, who will?" After saying this, the withered old monk, who was even older than the 100-year-old Dharma king of Mount Lantua, reached out his hand and touched the top of his head. It was as if he had smashed himself with a hammer, dispersing the golden light and illuminating the mountain peak. The white-browed monk's expression was sorrowful. Smashing the glass bottle with a hammer should have allowed one to become Buddha and achieve the supreme Dharmakaya. However, the monk knew that the monk in front of him was not like that at all. Above the west mountain, an unusually bright sun seemed to have lost its support. After the monk's self-empowerment, the sun quickly dimmed and the afterglow disappeared as it hurriedly fell down the mountain. The monk, who had white eyebrows that reached his knees, looked up again and could no longer see the old monk who had been enlightened for 40 years. There was a saying in the 2 Zen temples that one had an epiphany, but this pause had been rather long. The old monk could only hear the chanting of sutras all over the mountain. He sighed softly. Outside the Iron Gate Pass, an old monk flew across the desert and the Gobi Desert. Once, he stopped to use his fingers as a knife to cut off the flesh of his arm and feed it to the young eagles between the cracks of the mountain wall. Another time, he squatted in the desert and watched the insects swim away. When the dying old monk came to the Kuei Gate, he seemed to be over 10 years younger than before. He stood still outside the Kuei Gate, absent-mindedly and dizzily. Judging by the people who came in and left the Kuei Gate in a hurry, it seemed that they had been here for days and nights. When the warriors of the Kuei Gate prepared to go and ask them some questions, the old monk had already disappeared. There were many dangerous mountains and deep streams in the northern border of western Shu. It was difficult to reach the central plains. An old monk dressed in a monk's robe moved like a swan. He came and went like the wind. He saw mountains and rivers and stepped on them. His withered skin had already begun to glow, like a winter tree in the early spring. However, his eyes were getting more and more dizzy. His kasaya fluttered in the wind. His next step was where he wanted to land. He met a boatman pulling a boat on the shoal. The old monk appeared at the stern of the boat. He stepped into the bone-piercing cold river and listened to the chants of the Shu men. He slowly pushed the boat for 20 miles. Then he flashed across hundreds of feet in the deep mountains and old forests. With a loud bang, the old monk suddenly stopped. He held a winter bird that he had bumped into with both hands. His palms were badly mutilated. The old monk's eyes were confused. He first came to his senses, then silently grieved. Then he fell into confusion again and his eyes became unfocused. He stood there for half an hour. During this time, the heavy rain fell on his head and the snow and frost penetrated his bones. Until one morning, when the sun rose in the east, he suddenly turned around and headed east. He walked for thousands of miles through the yellow sand. He passed by the pool of Jin City, the ditch of Qianxia, and the narrow path before he finally set foot on the central plains. He took shelter under the wall of a small town and watched people walk with umbrellas. He watched people wash their clothes by the stream that was not higher than his knees. He listened to the night watchman's sound under the moon and stars, and he met frozen bones on the roadside in the ancient capital of the famous city. One day, the old monk, who was only 60 years old, saw a single word on a lonely grave in the wilderness. He didn't know why, but after traveling for thousands of miles and seeing thousands of people, he had already forgotten who he was, where he was going, and who he was seeing. The old monk continued to travel east in a daze. One day, he came to a green mountain. The wind shook the pine forest, and the sound was like waves. Using his mind, he floated up to an ancient pine and looked into the distance. He listened to the sound of the pine trees. After a full 10 minutes, he said hoarsely, "Pine trees." He firmly remembered the word, Lu. In addition, at this moment, the pine trees were like drums. The old monk was no longer old. He looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. To this monk from Mount Lantua who had traveled 10,000 miles to the east and forgotten the past, he was indeed not confused at this moment. He smiled and said, "Lu Songtao." Jiang Hu soon learned that a young crazy monk had come to the western regions. He traveled east, and his mouth seemed to be singing and reciting. Wherever he passed, he would suddenly kill anyone he did not agree with. Suddenly, he would instruct others to pass on the Dharma. On the boundless plain, young monks who seemed to be in their 20s were singing loudly and riding the wind. It was still the same useless song that had begun to spread across the central plains. Heaven and earth are useless, they are not worthy of my attention. The sun and moon are useless, they cannot exist together. Kunlun is useless, if it does not come, then it is me. Compassion is useless, I am sanctimonious. Peace is useless, my sleeves are empty. The great river is useless, it goes east and never returns. Wind and snow are useless, they cannot fill one's stomach. Grass is useless, it withers with each passing year. Meditation is useless, how can one become a Buddha? The young monk who was swaggering forward suddenly stopped and looked into the distance as if he was looking at the scenery hundreds of miles away. He held his belly and laughed loudly. A series of loud laughter suddenly resounded between heaven and earth. He did not restrain his laughter. The tattered kasaya on his body began to flutter. Wherever he passed, there was no trace of him. He tore a gully in the ground. The young monk sprinted for 600 miles. He broke walls, entered forests, and jumped mountains. Finally, he collided with a white-robed monk who was also sprinting from 600 miles away. The ground within a radius of 3 miles instantly sank into a huge round pit. After the collision, the young monk paused for a moment and then continued to run forward like a river flowing east. He was still laughing. The emperor is useless, it is only 100 years. The king of hell is useless, he envies me for being free. Immortals are useless, all mortals laugh. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. Where am I? Where am I going? Who in the world could block the path of this young crazy monk? Dong Tai had already gone to the sea to visit immortals. Chao Changqing was determined to restore his country. Could it be Wang Xinji in the martial emperor city? The world did not know that there was a mountain between the crazy monk and Wang Xinji. On the main peak of Mount Zhulu, there were 3,000 white jade steps. A white-robed devil who had just entered Mount Zhulu was looking down at the world. There were 2 big spiritual energy fish, one red and one green. They looked like carps but were not carps. They looked like dragons but were not dragons. The fish's whiskers were extremely slender. The fish floated in the air as if they were swimming. They swam around the white-robed man mysteriously. Besides the 2 strange creatures beside the white-robed man, there were 2 men of different ages near the steps. One of them was standing and the other was sitting. The younger one was less than 30 years old. He was short and had a dull look on his face. He sat on the steps and looked at the mountain scenery with his hands supporting his cheeks. The older one was about 40 years old. He carried a long cloth bag with a broken spear inside. The middle-aged man asked softly, "Sect master, let Deng Mao stop that monk from the west?" It was Bei Meng's words. The white-robed man asked calmly, "Can you stop Tuoba?" The man who called himself Deng Mao laughed self-mockingly and shook his head. The sect master's meaning was very simple. If he could stop Tuoba, he would have the ability to stop that gray-robed monk. After all, even the white-robed monk Li Dongxin had not succeeded. The short man said, even if he is Lu Songtao who escaped a calamity back then, he might not be able to defeat the current Wang Xianji and Tuoba when he was at his peak. The white-robed man sneered, wait until you defeat the ninth in the world, Deng Mao. Then you can say that. Deng Mao laughed softly, it will happen sooner or later. In the future, Beimeng will have to rely on Hong Jingyan and this kid to support its reputation. The white-robed man did not refute and slowly walked down the steps. The thousands of devils who were crawling on the steps lowered their heads. The white-robed man looked to the west expressionlessly. Since Li Dongxin was unwilling to be entangled, then let me, Luo Yang, fight with you, Lu Songtao. Chapter 805. There was one chapter in the evening and one in the early morning. The child was talking nonsense, not to mention the absurd theory of demons appearing outside the Zen temple. Naturally, they could not afford to make waves. The quarry mountain did not pay much attention to it at first, but Hu Chuanya, who liked to be lively, came to the stream with the children. When she saw the half-familiar figure of the guy, she did not know why she had an indescribable feeling. Hu Chuanya hesitated for a moment and walked over to stand by the stream. She glanced at the snow-white man. Originally, according to her temperament, she would only feel comfortable when she returned home after being humiliated outside. However, she was stunned and could not say anything harsh at the moment. Just when the children were confused, a beautiful woman in gorgeous clothes walked out of the Zen temple. She was like a plump peony. Compared to the young Hu Chuanya, her embryonic outline was similar, but she had a more mature charm. When the woman saw her daughter's figure, she was stunned for a moment. She smiled and walked slowly. When she approached, the slender white-haired man had already stood up and turned around. The woman was shocked. She thought that it was an old guest of the quarry mountain, but she did not expect it to be such a handsome and romantic young man. Especially the pair of red phoenix eyes. The woman praised in her heart, this thing can capture a woman's heart the best. She calmed herself down and was about to tease her daughter, but the young man had already introduced himself. He treated people well and spoke frankly. The woman thought that her taste was not bad and thought that if she could let this young man marry into the quarry mountain, it would not be a bad treatment for Hu Chuanya. After chatting for a while, the woman looked at Hu Chuanya like a mother-in-law looking at a son-in-law, which made Hu Chuanya very embarrassed. She tried to persuade her mother to go up the mountain. However, the woman kept looking back and chatting with the handsome young man, asking him to go up the mountain to enjoy the scenery when he was free tomorrow. The young man agreed. When the mother and daughter almost disappeared from his sight, he went down the mountain to his residence. Coincidentally, the woman turned her head and looked at each other. He smiled and waved his hand. The woman who had been eating vegetarian food and reciting Buddha in the Zen temple turned her head and asked in a low voice, Chuanya, what is the background of this suchi? Hu Chuanya rambled on about the two disturbances at Longway Slope. The woman laughed bitterly, laughing at herself for having the thought of letting him marry into her family. She sighed and said, then he is not an ordinary son of a general's family. The temple on Kaisher Mountain is too small to keep him. Hu Chuanya said angrily, why should I keep him? If it were not for Sister Zhou's face, I would not let him go up the mountain to eat and drink. The woman stretched out her finger and poked her daughter's forehead. She teased, no one knows a daughter better than a mother. Why are you still pretending to be a tigress in front of your mother? Don't look at how crazy you are now. Mother knows that when you get married in the future, you will definitely be a good wife and mother. Hu Chuanya held her mother's arm and giggled like a spoiled child. She asked curiously, how did mother know that guy is a general's son? The woman was Xianxia, the famous fierce woman of the quarry mountain. She said softly, this young man has the same momentum as your grandfather. He must be a man who has rolled in blood and bones. Even if the government officials are polite to you on the surface and arrogant in their bones, they are not like this. Moreover, you said that this man killed more than 100 Iron Hut soldiers on the Dragon Tail Slope. You must know that in the Liyang Imperial Palace, the civil and military officials have always minded their own business. If there is no big shot from the military in their family, they would not dare to be so bold. Otherwise, Even if you are the legitimate grandson of the minister of the 6 ministries, you would not act so domineeringly. You also said that this man's retinue, sitting on a horse, easily stabbed that devil of the devil cult to death with a single thrust of his spear. He is clearly a man who can defeat 10,000 people on the battlefield. Chunya, our quarry mountain must not be careless. Come with mother to your grandfather's place and tell him everything in detail. Hu Chunya said angrily, I won't go. Hu Xianxia smiled sweetly. She just held her daughter's cold little hand and walked slowly up the mountain. Love does not know where it comes from, but it goes deeper. Unfortunately, most of them turn from deep to shallow and forget each other. Su Fengnian returned to the quiet bamboo house and found that great ancestor Gu and Huang Shang seemed to have been waiting for a long time. He apologized and asked for a pot of wine from the maid in the bamboo house. Together with Yuan Zuozong, the 4 of them sat around the stove. The stove had 4 legs and a big iron basin was placed in the middle. The basin was filled with charcoal and the ashes after the charcoal was burned. The maid squatting by the stove was holding an iron pincer. She gently flipped the charcoal in the basin so that the charcoal would not be too hot and would not be extinguished. She squatted there and the light of the fire shone on her face. Su Fengnian knew the way to deal with this strange stove. He smiled and took the iron pincer from the maid and let her rest first. When the maid walked out of the room, he smiled and said, If there are sweet potatoes or zongzi from the south, it will be delicious after being roasted. It's the first time I travel and I'm a bit down. But it's not all because I'm hungry. It's really delicious. Chapter 806. Great Ancestor Gu nodded his head. After perfunctorily agreeing, he said in a deep voice, When I talked with Your Highness earlier, Your Highness indeed knows the Ashes collection by heart. You are not trying to worm your way into being friends with me. Since I, Great Ancestor Gu, want to go to the poor place in Bailiang to show off my skills, then I will not hide some things. Just as the Ashes collection said at the beginning, the world's most dangerous places are not because of the geographical location, but because of the people. Bailiang is poor, not only in terms of money and geography, but also in terms of people. Great Ancestor Gu admired the king of Bailiang's management of the army. However, in these years, the imperial court has been making things difficult for Bailiang, making it impossible for Bailiang to form a decent group of scholars. Originally, it was not easy to have the Yao family, but Yao Baifeng sent it to the imperial court to fill the hole left by the collapse of the Song family. It was like a rural woman who flirted with the rich men in the city all year round and finally married into a rich family and became a concubine. In addition, the scholars in the world have always regarded the spring and autumn period as a great injustice. The king of Bailiang has been regarded as the chief culprit who broke the backbone of the scholars. No rich families or aristocratic families will go to the Su family for fear of leaving a stain in history and being ashamed to face their ancestors. Bailiang's fields are in short supply and it is already an urgent matter. Li Yishan is a great talent, but it is also difficult for him to cook without rice. Now that Chen Zhibao's illness has caused a large number of generals to go to Shu, secretly wanting to establish their own family. They are waiting for him to be conferred the title of the king of Shu and restrict Bailiang, making Bailiang a floating house with holes on all sides. At this time, they need a large number of fresh people to sew the walls and window paper. The outer wall of Bailiang's courtyard is still fine. With the 300,000 cavalry under the command of the king of Bailiang, neither the Liang imperial court nor the tiger and wolf of Beimang will dare to provoke them easily. However, the window paper that makes the house warm ultimately depends on the civil officials. Warriors can ride fierce horses and carry iron spears, but it is not appropriate to ask them to do embroidery work. Su Fengnian calmly said, The leader of the Green Party is the Lu family, one of the 8 pillars of Liang, Lu Feiqi. He can be considered a genuine minister of 2 dynasties. He has served in the 3 ministries of military and civil affairs. Before he retired, even the Grand Secretary Zhang Julu had to pay respect to him as a disciple. This old pillar of state has the intention to let a woman from the Lu family marry into Bailiang. This time when I return to Bailiang, going to Shangyin Academy is a private matter. Going to Qingzhou to visit Lu Feiqi is the main business. I am trying to persuade the old man to move his family to the north. Su Fengnian reached out to stir the charcoal fire and laughed. I couldn't open my mouth in the past. First of all, the marriage wasn't set in stone yet. I was afraid that Bailiang would think too highly of themselves. It's fine if I lose face, but Su Xiao can't afford to lose face like this. Moreover, the time wasn't right. At that time, the Green Party in Qingzhou was known for its unity in the imperial court. It wasn't like today when the tree falls. Now, under the control of Zhang Julu, the Green Party has fallen apart. The other two families of the Green Party have clung to the Zhang Party and the Gu Party. I think it's time for the Lu family to find a way out for themselves. After all, the Lu family was the most powerful family in the past. They were suppressed by the other two families until they couldn't raise their heads. After they completely separated, they couldn't beat the other two families. Because now the Lu family is sleeping like a widow. Huang Chang, who hadn't interjected all this time, was puzzled and asked, "Sleeping like a widow? What do you mean?" Great Ancestor Gu laughed loudly and said, "There's no one up there." Huang Chang, who was upright and honest, quietly gritted his teeth and quickly lowered his head to drink. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "The Lu family, which is full of power and influence, is a strong medicine. Sir Huang, who is alone, is a warm medicine. Bailiang can't do without either. In addition, Bailiang is also willing to protect the world and make all the poor happy. Soon, the whole world will know about Chen Shiliang and Lu Wenbao." Huang Chang chewed for a moment and said softly, "Poor scholars, what a good, protect the world and make all the poor happy." Great Ancestor Gu's words had always been straightforward. Scholars read the books of the sages, but few of them are wholeheartedly focused on becoming sages. In fact, they are all seeking fame and fortune. Those aristocratic families who have been in high positions for a long time can ignore Bailiang, but the poor scholars who have no foundation are different. Although the imperial court spared no effort to recruit poor scholars after Zhang Julu formed the cabinet, no one is a fool. After so many years, only a small group of people have made a name for themselves. Even if the majority of the scholars obtained scholarly honors, they would still be suppressed by the aristocratic families. If Bailiang's bounty is really worth it, there will be a lot of scholars who have failed to achieve their goals. Perhaps many of Beimang's spring and autumn annals will go south. Huang Chang Great Ancestor Gu muttered to himself, "Since ancient times, the capital region has been a place of war. Western Shu is the easiest place to grow a separatist power. With the Han family's loyalty, Jizhou can control the fate of the world. In the southeast, the land is neither biased nor weak. It is the lack of progress that leads to the lack of self-protection. Great Ancestor Gu dares to say that in the next 1,000 years, the situation will be like sitting in the north and swallowing the south. Bailiang's territory is narrow and long. It seems to be a struggle for survival, but it may be a blessing in the misfortune. Raising an army in a cold land is not the same as raising an army in the south. To be honest, I am a boorish man who only knows how to lead an army. If I don't go to Bailiang, where can I go? Can Li Yang give me 100,000 elite soldiers? Won't I have to worry about whether I will rebel every day? Hey, I really want to rebel. I want to have a good fight with Gu Jiantang. Gu Jiantang destroyed southern Tang. What great ability! Not to mention the irony in Great Ancestor Gu's words, just the word rebel made Huang Chang break out in a cold sweat. North Gu Jiantang, South Gu Great Ancestor Gu. Li Yishan once commented in the Tide Listening Pavilion that southern Tang was destroyed. It was not Gu's fault. Huang Chang glanced at Su Fengnian. The young man's expression was calm. He seemed to be indifferent to Great Ancestor Gu's disrespectful and rebellious words. A group of people walked into the bamboo house. Zhao Hongdan and Hu Jingxiu were among them. The leader was an old man with a head full of white hair. He was tall and sturdy. He was old but vigorous. Everything had its vanquisher. Hu Chuanya was fearless in front of anyone, but in front of this grandfather, she was unusually docile and well-behaved. The old man's surname was Hu Gonglai. He was a remnant of southern Tang. He was once a valiant general in a strategic town on the border of southern Tang. After southern Tang was destroyed, he still led a cavalry in Kaisher Mountain. It seemed that he could not sleep well if he did not hear the sound of war drums and the thunderous hooves. Hu Gonglai was known for his irritable temperament. When he entered the bamboo house, he was even more vigorous. Great Ancestor Gu sat with his back to the door. Hu Gonglai was about to speak when he saw Great Ancestor Gu's back. He was stunned. Although Zhao Hongdan was the owner of Kaisher Mountain in name, he always had a feeling of living under someone else's roof. He had never seen his father-in-law so nervous. For a moment he was confused. Great Ancestor Gu turned around and did not speak. Hu Gonglai waved his hand and ordered his daughter and son-in-law, "All of you leave." He was the only one left standing in the room. Hu Gonglai, who had a lot of weight in Kaisher Mountain, did not sit down. Instead, he suddenly knelt down with his fists on the ground. He said in a deep voice, "Southern Tang's Defense General Hu Gonglai pays his respects to Great General Gu." Great Ancestor Gu turned around indifferently. He did not look at Hu Gonglai, who was kneeling on the ground. He laughed at himself and said, "How did you recognize me as Great Ancestor Gu?" Hu Gonglai was silent. Great Ancestor Gu sighed and said, "Get up. That year, you, Hu Gonglai, followed the previous emperor out of the city. Did you not kneel enough? Southern Tang is gone just like that." Hu Gonglai choked with sobs and pressed his forehead to the ground. Great Ancestor Gu said calmly, "At that time, many people knelt for a high official. You, Hu Gonglai, are the least worthy of your conscience. Well, get up and speak." After Hu Gonglai stood up, he turned his head and wiped his face. When he opened his mouth, he said something that gave Huang Chang a headache. "Great General, I heard that West Chu wants to restore the country. Is our Southern Tang also going to rise in revolt?" "Great General, don't worry. If any little bastard surnamed Hu on Kaisher Mountain dares to frown and is afraid of being beheaded, Hu Gonglai will be the first to twist his head." Chapter 807. The next chapter will be released in the wee hours of the morning. As usual, it will not be updated on the 25th. There will be 2 chapters on the 25th. P.S. Deng Mao is a typo, but it is actually Wang Mao. Hu Gonglai was an old man who had experienced ups and downs. He would not be scared even if he was stabbed by a knife or an axe. However, when he knew the identities of the other 3 people sitting around the stove, he was stunned. The imperial censor Huang Shang was still okay, but the spring and autumn white bear Yuan's Wuzong was enough to shock Hu Gonglai, not to mention the hereditary crown prince of Bailiang. Hu Gonglai followed Great Ancestor Gu to another bamboo building for a secret talk. When he learned that Great Ancestor Gu was about to go to Bailiang, he did not hesitate to say that his family would migrate. In his words, even if they lived in Quarry Mountain, they would still struggle at death's door. Who knew when they would be beheaded by the Liang imperial court? It was better to go to Bailiang to earn a chance for the Hu family's descendants to fight for military merits. Great Ancestor Gu neither objected nor made a promise. He just patted Hu Gonglia's shoulder before leaving. Su Fengnian did not know the content of the conversation between the 2 Southern Tang elders. After he sent Huang Shang back to the bamboo building, he received a secret letter from a military falcon. It was a spiritual creature trained by Chu Lushan, the #1 spy of Bailiang. The secret letter briefly explained 2 things. One was that some hidden families like Wang Lin who had taken root in Liang had begun to rise up and move closer to Bailiang. The other was somewhat inexplicable. It said that a crazy monk who was both Buddha and demon came out of Lantua Mountain. After he came out of the mountain, he returned to his youth. He did not even stop Li Dongxin and asked His Royal Highness to be careful when going north. After Su Fengnian finished writing about Great Ancestor Gu and Huang Shang, he put the military falcon back and sat in front of the stove with Yuan's Wuzong who had not left yet. He threw the secret letter with unique handwriting into the charcoal fire. A wisp of smoke curled up. Su Fengnian bent down to pick up the fire tongs and sprinkle some light ash on the charcoal. He said softly, "Jianghu is not peaceful. Lantua Mountain is probably not convinced by the 2 Zen temples and has a monk in white who can carry the Yellow River." When the monk came out of the mountain, he was a decaying old man who had lived for 2 or 3 decades. When he came to the Central Plains from the western region, he became a young man and killed indiscriminately along the way. It is far from being called a fierce warrior who subdues demons and demons. When I first met Monk Long Shou of Lantua Mountain in Bailiang, He only said that the female Dharma king who had the 6 signs wanted to practice dual cultivation with me. I hurried back to the pavilion to read the secret records. I was disappointed when I learned that she was an old woman in her 40s. I also learned that there were 3 more senior monks in Lantua Mountain before the 6-jewel Bodhisattva. One of them had been imprisoned for nearly 40 years and was even more shocking than the withered sword in the sword tomb of the Wu family. At that time, I had not practiced the blade and did not understand the freedom of immortals. I was curious how he could survive without eating or drinking. I reckon that this monk has most likely gone mad. Speaking of which, to be able to kill half of the Jianghu by himself, I think only the devil cult's cult leader, Lu Songtao, from 100 years ago would have this kind of spirit. Every generation of Jianghu has its own playboy. In Lu Songtao's generation, there were sword immortals and sages of the 3 religious sects in the same Jianghu. They complemented each other but also restrained each other. Moreover, it has always been recognized that there is heaven's way above Kung Fu. Since those who had gone through untold hardships to stand at the peak of Kung Fu, most of them were righteous figures like the old man in the sheepskin fur coat and Dong Tai. Even Wang Xianxia, who was praised to be able to fight with Ancestor Lu, was not an evil person. Lu Songtao and the crazy monk dared to risk universal condemnation and were not afraid of being punished by heaven. It's a pity that the bull rider is not here. Otherwise, the monk would not have had the chance to go crazy. He would have been killed by the Wudong martial granduncle who had enlightened his acupores. Yuan Zhuozong stretched out his hands to the stove and felt the warmth of the winter. He smiled and said, if the monk could really stand on the same side as Lu Songtao, even Qi Xuanzhen, who carried out justice on behalf of heaven, would not be able to defeat him. Su Fengnian laughed and said, there are 2 biggest sayings in the world. One is that the emperor and the emperor carry out the will of heaven. The other is that the immortals of the 3 religious sects carry out justice on behalf of heaven. Anyway, I don't have anything to do with it. I can only watch the fun. By the way, second brother Yuan, do you know what's going on with Lu Songtao? Although Zhulu Mountain has been labeled as an evil cult by Jianghu, in my opinion, it is much better than the hypocrites of the so-called righteous people except for its treacherous whereabouts and resolute actions. Moreover, all the previous hierarch took it as their own responsibility to fight for the world. They are not devils who only know how to kill people. There are very few rumors about Lu Songtao in Jianghu. Yuan Zhuozong squinted his eyes and said coldly, when I was young, I heard from an unworldly superior that Lu Songtao had traveled to Jianghu several times and made countless enemies. When the hierarch of the evil cult was in seclusion in Zhulu Mountain, an ordinary-looking woman was said to be his woman. She wandered in Jianghu and her end was tragic. In short, not only the righteous Jianghu people, but also many emperors and ministers had a share of the pie. The woman was finally hanged in front of everyone. She was still naked before her death. Somehow, Lu Songtao knew about it and forced himself to break out of seclusion to carry the coffin for the woman. After that, it was a catastrophe that no one could save. At that time, the immortals all avoided him. Not all of them showed weakness to Lu Songtao, who was really invincible in the world, but more of them did not want to fight. When we look back, we can see that the mastermind behind the conspiracy was so ambitious and scheming that it was only inferior to Huang Sanjia's subversion of spring and autumn. Su Fengnian's face was gloomy. He gritted his teeth and said nothing. Chapter 808. Yuan Zhuozong bent down to pick up a piece of burning charcoal from the stove and gently crushed it. He said indifferently, the hermit who told me about this said that Lu Songtao joked before he died that he would never live forever. So, he did some evil things in a hurry. He thought that he was doomed in his previous life, so why not be a good person? Although I guess that it was most likely an excuse given by the later generations, it really didn't feel good when I heard it. Originally, these words should have been passed down by sages to warn the world. However, it was said by a devil who killed people like scything flax. It served them right that the land immortals of that generation of Jianghu couldn't attain Tao. If I lived in the same life as Lu Songtao, I would kill a few more for him. Su Fengnian sneered, no wonder my master said that the king of hell laughed at the people in the world of the living. Yuan Zhuozong poured a cup of wine and drank it in one gulp. This peerless general, who was even more pure than the villain Shinjibao in northern Liang, looked at the empty cup and murmured to himself, "Adoptive father has a clear conscience since he was able to reach this stage today. Yuan Zhuozong is only a martial artist. He doesn't even think about managing the country and bringing peace to the world. In these years he has seen many filthy people and matters in northern Liang, but he still watches with folded arms. He only hopes that after foster father leaves, there will be one person who can stand up. As long as he stands on the Liang-Mang border, the northern Mang cavalry won't dare to take a step south." Su Fengnian shook his head. "I'm afraid I can't do it." Yuan Zhuozong smiled. "It's enough for me to live up to the name of Beiliang." Su Fengnian suddenly said, "I don't know why. After I came back from Beimang, I often had the same dream. Standing on a high place, I saw millions of dead people in armor rushing towards me. Behind them were millions of underworld warriors. There was a big flag on the tree next to me. It wasn't Su, but Qin." Yuan Zhuozong said helplessly, "It's okay to fight in a battle. But I can't interpret dreams." Su Fengnian didn't want to make a fuss over nothing. He smiled and said, "Second brother Yuan, let's talk about the future steps of the Beiliang army." Yuan Zhuozong laughed heartily. "Then I'll need a few more pots of wine." On Zhulu Mountain, the broken spear Wang Mao, who ranked 9th in the new martial arts ranking, was standing on the top of the mountain. The strong wind at the edge of the cliff slapped his cheeks hard. Beside him sat an ordinary-looking short man. The latter had always been like this. He would never stand if he could sit. As a young nobleman of one of the two royal families of Beimang, he had become a level 1 master at a young age along with the fat lady who was also a relative of the royal family. They had become the top martial artists after Murong Baoding in the royal family of Beimang. The reason why Wang Mao followed the female devil to the central plains of Liang was that he had lost to her. It was not strange that the 9th in the world lost to the 4th in the world who had fought with Dong Tai and Tuoba. However, if he were Wang Mao, he would definitely not admit defeat. The reason why he had shamelessly come to the south was because he had heard that there was a young man younger than him who had made a trip to their northern Mang, and had even slaughtered the 5th raccoon. He felt that no matter what, he should kill a finger-profound realm expert in Liang to vent his anger. That bloated woman who was fatter than him, and even more damnable, who was 2 heads taller than him, always mocked him for only having the ability to be a tyrant at home. He only thought about how to make a name for himself here, so that he could make that woman obediently admit defeat when he returned. The short young man crossed his arms and asked seriously, "Wang Mao, do you think Luo Yang can stop that crazy monk?" Wang Mao exhaled a long breath, 50-50. The young man glanced at Wang Mao. The 6th jewel master of Mount Lantua is only at the Grand Vajra stage, which is not even considered complete. He is still far from Li Dongxin, who is truly at the invincible Vajra stage. How can this monk be so powerful? Luo Yang almost ruined the good thing that Tuoba had been brewing for 20 years in the northern icefield. Obviously, compared to the battle with Dong Tai in Dunhuang City, Luo Yang's strength had gone up another level. For someone like her, not to mention climbing up a level, even lifting her foot would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Since she has already reached such a level, how can the odds of victory still be 50-50? Wang Mao smiled. "If we can stop her, the demon sect's leader will fight and the world will know. If we can't stop her, we can wait for Wang Xinji to leave the city before we leave Liang." The young man sighed. "Then it's better to stop her." Both of them knew that the number 1 demonic cultivator in Beimang, Luo Yang, had become the 10th leader of the demon sect, but they didn't know that the person Luo Yang was going to stop was the former 9th leader. The grandeur of this battle might not necessarily lose to the battle between Wang Xinji and Li Chungang on the Eastern Sea. The muddle-headed young mad monk not only knew his own name, he also knew that he was really crazy. When he killed people, he had no regrets. He only felt that these people deserved to die. When he thought about the cause and effect, he had a splitting headache. It was so painful that he almost wanted to roll on the ground. He knew that he was crazy, so he couldn't help crying and laughing along the way. Every time he passed a place and saw a person, he quickly forgot that place and that person. Every time he wanted to stop and look back, he couldn't do it. It was as if he was supposed to travel to the west, but he went east. The Buddhist country was in the west, but he went in the opposite direction. In the end, he went further and further away. With only a trace of clarity left, he only wanted to know what he had put down in the west and what he had to pick up in the east. A useless song evolved from 4 words to more than 100 words. He didn't memorize it, but he could always blurt it out. Mad Monk might have forgotten, but the Jianghu of the Central Plains was already in a state of panic. Other than the world-famous white-robed monk who tried to stop the young monk, Wu Luding, the current sword crown of the sword tomb of the Wu family, tried to stop the young monk with a sword. Mad Monk crashed into him and scattered his sword momentum. Then he ran faster than the Wu family sword. After that, the most outstanding young celestial master of the Dragon Tiger Mountain, Xianxia, also made a move. The monk and the celestial master faced each other face to face, but they didn't collide. The monk kept his head down and ran forward. Xianxia, who was rumored to be the reincarnation of the first celestial master of the mansion of the celestial master, retreated at the same time. After 80 miles, Xianxia stepped aside and let the mad monk continue to move forward while laughing. Xianxia quickly sat cross-legged on the ground, bleeding from his 7 orifices. The whole Jianghu was afraid of the monk's imposing manner. At the bank of a big river, the mad monk stopped. Just like when he sensed the white-robed monk Li Dongxin, he grinned and then squatted down. He scooped up a handful of water and lowered his head to stare at the muddy water in his palm. He was like an ordinary person who held boiling water and hurriedly sprinkled it on the ground. He stood up and looked around blankly. At that moment, the young monk's face was full of tears. He asked himself, "I'm here. Where are you?" Chapter 809. This north-south river was called the Green Crossing River. The river water was noisy and the surface of the river was 20 zhang wide. According to legend, the ancient Taoist immortals once rode a green reed here to carry people across the river. The young mad monk's straight line to the east allowed the people of Jianghu to figure out the general route. A group of spectators had been waiting here for a long time. At first they were scattered, but later they involuntarily gathered together. They were really afraid of the monk's irresistible force and were afraid of being killed by an innocent person. They felt that if they were in a group, their chances of survival would be higher. Even if they were unlucky enough to step on that straight line, they would all die together and be companions on the road to the netherworld. Therefore, 50 to 60 people gathered together. The fish and the honest people were mixed together. There were Jianghu heroes who had been famous for a long time. There were Jianghu heroes who hid their heads and tails. There were Jianghu heroes who had only just entered the Jianghu. There were nameless pawns who had entered the Jianghu. And there were also young heroines whose beauty made people drool. There were a few pairs of old enemies, but at this moment they did not have the time to draw their swords against each other, but they were all secretly on guard. Several popular heroines either approached the famous heroes with smiling faces to flatter them, or they were politely accosted by many Jianghu men with cold faces. In the present Jianghu, where people who carried bricks and fought street battles dared to call themselves Wulin people, it was like the Yellow River and the mud and sand. It was impossible to expect everyone to be as free and unrestrained as Dong Tai Li Chungang. A few years ago, there was a young talent who had a good reputation who threatened to imitate the ancient people and perform a feat similar to crossing the river on a reed. He really succeeded and won countless cheers at that time. It was a pity that within a few days he was exposed by his Jianghu peers, saying that the reason he was able to step on the water and float across the river was because of an iron chain that hung a few feet below the surface of the river the night before. He had no choice but to retreat from Jianghu dejectedly. And this was where the brilliance of Jianghu lay. You would never be able to guess what kind of magnificent feat a true genius would achieve, and you would never be able to predict what kind of joke the next person would be. The sudden stop of the young monk, who had already made a name for himself, made those onlookers who thought that the useless monk would directly cross the river tremble. They were afraid that he would be like a pedestrian who saw an eyesore and would stretch out his foot to crush the nest of ants. However, what happened next not only relieved the onlookers, but also gave them a great surprise. They saw a stranger in white coming from the opposite bank of the Qingdu River. The stranger's vision was blurred, and it was hard to tell whether the stranger was a man or a woman. The stranger crossed the river, and the young monk just happened to come back to his senses after holding the water and looking at himself in the mirror. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and rushed to the river surface. The two people separated as soon as they touched each other. The mad monk, who had always been invincible, was actually stepped on by the man in white on his bald head. The man in white floated back to the east bank, and every time he stepped on the mud, there was a muffled sound. The mad monk also fell back to the west bank, staggering like a drunkard and shaking his sleeves like an actor. The power of one step made the turbulent river suddenly stagnate. It was not until the two people landed that the river regained its momentum. The young monk, whose kasaya was in tatters, did not hesitate to cross the river for the second time. The man in white also crossed the river to intercept him. This time, the man in white stomped hard on the monk's chest. The whole river under the two people shook. In the eyes of everyone, the man in white, whose face they finally recognized, was handsome and valiant. Of course, he was the immortal who had not appeared in the world. Although he looked young, he must have lived for hundreds of years. The useless monk, who was worthy of being called a devil in a kasaya, was destined to be stronger than the immortal today. This time, the two sides, who were at the apex of the righteous and the evil, retreated to almost the same place as before. Looking from afar, it was impossible for the onlookers to notice the difference. The man in white was expressionless and did not care about the admonition of not doing things more than 3 times. The monk, who had once been Mahavarakana on Mount Lantua, also waved his sleeves and swept across the river. This time, the young monk, who was wearing a pair of tattered straw sandals, pushed out his palm and pressed it against the sole of the man in white's shoes. This time, they were in a confrontation. Visible ripples of chi clouds appeared behind the two people. The monk's figure fell, and his straw sandals slid 100 feet on the river's surface and floated straight back to the shore. The man in white's speed of retreating was slightly slower. However, the monk stood on the shore near the water, while the man in white's landing point was more than the previous 2 times. This situation made the onlookers feel anxious. The monk lowered his head and looked at the straw sandals that he had casually woven. The onlookers were in a daze. A battle of life and death between masters was often decided by a hair's breadth. Was this crazy guy who sang the useless song all day in a hurry to be reincarnated? Or did he not regard the man in white as a mortal enemy at all? Was it really as he sang, heaven and earth were not worthy of his attention? Fortunately, the man in white did not disappoint the onlookers. After retreating 3 times, he did not show any signs of fatigue. This time, he did not cross the river in 1 step, but jumped to the center of the river. With the tip of his foot, he picked up a water column as thick as a bucket. The water sword pierced forward fiercely, and the man in white followed behind it. The nameless monk with tattered straw sandals and a torn kasaya gently raised his head and raised an arm to cover his hand. He used the sleeve to cover his hand to form a secret mudra. The water sword fiercely hit the monk about 3 feet away. It was like an egg hitting a rock, shattering with a loud bang and blooming water splashes all over the sky. The man in white did not retreat, and even used the demon subduing mudra to break the monk's sleeve mudra. The 2 mudras were in a deadlock. The man in white raised his leg and kicked. The monk smiled and let the leg sweep across his neck. His body flipped in the air, and when he landed, he was already in a sitting position with his fingers bent like a firefly. It was too wonderful for words. The man in white seemed to be really angry. For the first time, he spoke coldly and slapped the monk's bald head with his palm. 5 characters absorbing track. The monk took the palm head on again, still in a sitting position. His body spun and he sat on the surface of the river. The river water rolled down south, but he floated on the water without moving. The man in white retreated to the place where the young monk was sitting. He raised his right hand and a water sword was pulled out from the river water. She, who had once fought with Dong Tai in Dunhuang, slashed down on the head of the Akalanatha Wisdom King. The water sword broke. It was unknown whether it was the holy monk of Mount Lantual or the crazy monk of Lu Songtao from the devil cult who sank half of his body into the water. He lay facing the south with his right hand supporting his chin. He became more peaceful and carefree. However, thousands of water droplets were splashing on the surface of the Qingdu River. Perhaps because the spectators were too noisy, Luo Yang, who had killed her way to Beimeng Empress and to Oba in Beimeng, waved her hand and splashed the water like arrows. 50 to 60 people would die on the spot without exception. A young Taoist wearing a Wudong Taoist robe ran for a long time and finally caught up with the murderous rain. He stood between the spectators and the splashing water. He drew a circle with his hands and gathered all the water droplets in the big circle between his hands. It turned into a water ball that was almost as tall as a person and then pushed it into the river water. Luo Yang frowned. The young Taoist did not speak to the man in white. Instead, he said to the crazy monk who was slowly getting up, "If the breeze is useful, turn the book for me. If the Kunlun is useful, I will go down the mountain. If the grass is useful, I will know whether it flourishes or withers. If the meditation is useful, I will seek peace of mind. If the river is useful, I will quench my thirst with a ladle. If the sun and moon are useful, I will follow my heart. If I am here, I will go somewhere." It seemed like he was talking nonsense, but in the end, this Wudong Taoist had given his own opinion on the crazy monk's useless song. Unexpectedly, after the monk stood up, his eyes were no longer turbid, they were as clear as spring water. His hands were behind his back. In the blink of an eye, his appearance had changed more than a dozen years. The young monk had turned into a middle-aged monk. His previous ignorance and bewilderment had been swept away, replaced by a vigorous air that looked disdainfully at the world. At this moment, Lu Songtao was the 9th cult leader of the devil cult at his peak. Standing on the river surface, he cast a glance toward the young Taoist priest. Then he turned his gaze toward the white-robed Luo Yang. With a chuckle he said, "The current Jianghu is really an eye-opener. I remember at that time in the World Sword Forest, there was a sword immortal Wei Chao. He recklessly rode his sword to pursue the deer mountain and stabbed my abdomen. I returned the favor by stabbing his sword into his mouth. His body was hung on the top of the mountain. The number of enemies I implicated was really too many. But when I roamed the Jianghu for the last time, I rarely met an opponent who could be considered as my equal. That kind of Jianghu was lifeless. But now it is different." Luo Yang only responded with a cold laugh. Lu Songtao lowered his head to look at the Kasaya and fell into deep thought. Shaking his head, Lu Songtao raised his head and said with a laugh, "It doesn't matter if you can't figure it out. Since I clearly remember who I am, I can't come here in vain. I don't care who you are. Since you want to stop me, I don't know when I will lose my consciousness. How about we make a bet? Let's bet if I can make it 300 li to the east. If you lose, I will go to Zhulu Mountain. If I lose, you will be the cult leader of the devil cult after Lu Songtao." Luo Yang calmly said, "If you hide, don't talk about 300 li, you won't even be able to make it 30 li." Behind her, a big red fish with a carp's body and dragon's whiskers appeared. Lu Songtao laughed loudly and raised his hand to borrow a sword from the waist of a spectator. He held the sword horizontally across his chest and flicked his finger. The sound didn't come from in front of him but from the 9th heaven. The world only knows that Lu Songtao is a devil who willfully slaughters the innocent. He has always liked to kill people with his bare hands. Only one person knows the difference between Lu Songtao with a sword and without one. It's funny that in that generation of Jianghu, including Wei Chao and Wei Chao, there were at least 5 land immortals. After I came out of seclusion, none of them were worthy of Lu Songtao drawing his sword. Lu Songtao looked at Zhulu Mountain 300 li away, his gaze gentle and intoxicated. "You said you wanted to see the elegance of a sword immortal with your own eyes, so here I am. That time, I was late by 6 days. This time, I might be late by a whole 100 years." Chapter 8:10. Occasionally, a huge koi fish would jump out of the water and fall back into the river. The 50 or 60 Jianghu people who survived the disaster did not make a sound for a long time, even if they saw the man in white and the monk in gray leave. They were afraid of the unexpected disaster until the young Taoist turned around and bowed. When they heard that the Taoist called himself Li Yufu of Wudong, it was like thunder in their ears. After Wang Zhongluo and Hong Shixiang, the new chief of Wudong, Wang Zhongluo was recognized as a late bloomer. He gradually entered a good state in the cultivation of Tiandao until he reached the Big Yellow Court. As for the immortal Hong Shixiang, he rode a crane to Jiangnan, went to Dragon Tiger Mountain with a sword, and drove out of Tai and city. These were all mysterious deeds that even the immortals would envy. As the youngest chief in the history of Wudong Mountain, Li Yufu's future achievements might not be as high as Tianmen. Li Yufu looked elegant and had a high social status. He was easy to get along with people, which was the opposite of the arrogant Taoist of Dragon Tiger Mountain. While he was talking with someone, Li Yufu looked happy and apologized. He turned around and greeted a middle-aged Taoist who had landed on the bank of Green Crossing River. "Why are you here, Junior Uncle Wang?" Sword maniac Wang Xiaoping looked to the east and said seriously, "The killing intent of this crazy monk is too strong. It's like Lu Songtao of the devil cult mentioned by Senior Brother Song. I want to confirm it. If it's really him, Wang Xianji is unwilling to leave the city. Deng, he has already gone out to the sea to visit the immortals. Chao Zhangqing is busy with the restoration of West Chu, Gu Jiantang, Chen Zhibao, and the others are loyal officials of the imperial court, so they won't make a move. Li Dongxin has already made a move once, so he probably won't stop him again. Shangyin Academy is 260 miles ahead, so I have to come." Li Yufu said guiltily. Yufu overestimated himself and made martial Uncle Little Wang worry. Wang Xiaoping, who was also unapproachable on the mountain, smiled for the first time. He walked slowly along the bank of the river and said to the young chief beside him, "It's okay. This is the responsibility of Wudong Mountain." Back then, little junior brother said that ordinary martial artists strive to be alone in the world when they cultivate. However, for us Taoists, cultivation is like carrying a burden and climbing a mountain. That's why little junior brother can carry the martial Tao and the heavenly Tao with one shoulder. Sect leader, your foundation is not bad, you are similar to Xiao Shidi's, your temperament is even more similar to his. It's just that you need to think more about the true meaning of these words. Right now, Mount Wudong is flourishing with incense, almost catching up to the scene of several hundred years ago. Headmaster, the more you can't just raise your head and look at the people in the sky. After all, youngest Shidi's cultivation is indeed profound and unfathomable. But where the cultivation came from is even more important. Li Yufu said warmly, "Junior Wang, I will remember your words." The breeze on the river made Wang Xiaoping's simple and unadorned Taoist robes flutter in the wind, making her look even more like a swordsman. The sword maniac stopped in his tracks and said with a smile, "If junior apprentice brother listens to my nagging, he will definitely have to flatter him a little. Only then will he have the face to steal winter bamboo shoots from my purple bamboo forest. Otherwise, he will chop bamboo to make a fishing rod. Chief, you should learn more from your junior apprentice uncle's laziness and rashness. Although the heavy burden of Mount Wudong is on your shoulders, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't go against your heart. As martial uncles and martial uncles, we don't have great abilities. We have the will but not the strength. We can only ask junior apprentice brother to bear more with you. In fact, although we don't say it out loud, we have been feeling sorry for all these years." Li Yufu's expression changed slightly. Taoist cultivation originally pursued the concept of knowing the autumn of the world when a leaf fell and the spring of the world when a bud sprouted. Wang Xiaoping went straight to the point and said, "Although I'm not strong enough, I should still use some of my strength to shoulder some of the burden. This is also going with the flow. If that white-robed man can't stop Mad Monk, he will most likely run into that man. Since I promised junior brother, I should also go and stop him. I've been obsessed with the sword all my life, but I've never felt that I could use my sword to my heart's content. Last time outside the divine martial arts city, I had a lot of enlightenment. Previously, when I saw Su Fengyan cultivating his will at the bottom of the lake, I learned a lot from him. This mad monk can help me sharpen my swordsmanship. If I'm not as good as him and die with my sword broken, you don't have to worry about me, master." Li Yufu said in a trembling voice, "Junior apprentice Uncle Wang, can you let me do a divination?" Wang Xiaoping laughed heartily and flew away. Today, Wang Xiaoping will have a narrow escape. Li Yufu sat by the river dejectedly. Even if Li Yufu could see his own life and death indifferently, he could not see others' life and death indifferently. This was a big cage. Drawing a circle on Mount Lantua and the withered sword in the Wu family's sword tomb had the same effect. They were both self-satisfied, but Mount Wudong was never like that. The great hammer of Buddhism was used to break through obsession. However, when obsession broke through obsession, it fell into the inferior category. Taoist cultivators pursued Tao and asked. Li Yufu used to ask himself what would happen after attaining immortality and passing through the gate of heaven. It was said that the world was full of hardships, but the immortals were happy. Li Yufu looked sad and looked at the yellow water of the river. There were many heroes in history, including immortals, Buddhas, and sages. A real man could stand on his own ground, his family, his country, and the world. The wind blew and the river water hit the shore, soaking the young chief of Wudong's Taoist robe and shoes. The crowd of Jianghu spectators in the distance, including the swordsman whose sword was borrowed by the crazy monk Lu Songtao, did not come back to his senses for a long time. He suddenly cried tears of joy and shouted loudly, wishing that the world would know that the strange monk borrowed his sword. Lu Songtao borrowed his sword without any warning, and his status in Jianghu suddenly rose. Several Jianghu seniors and big shots took the initiative to get close to him and said some polite greetings and warm words. Li Yufu turned a deaf ear to them. A bright red river carp jumped out of the river and jumped into the young Taoist's arms. It really matched the couplet of a small Taoist temple on Mount Wudong. The heavenly design ginseng in the carp's arms was lively, and the man was free from worldly worries and comprehends coolness. Li Yufu held the carp and lowered his head to look at the lively carp in his arms. He was in a daze and suddenly smiled. I'm Li Yufu. You and I are fated. I hope you won't be greedy and take the bait. If all things can really cultivate, I'll be able to cultivate. You and I should work together to cultivate Tao. Li Yufu held the carp with both hands and gently threw it into the river. I hope we can meet again after hundreds of years. The computer beside Qingdu River was mysterious. The man and the carp made a promise of hundreds of years. The collision 30 miles away was full of the smell of blood. Chapter 8:11. Luo Yang, who took out a spiritual object from the mausoleum of the Emperor Qin, did not stop him once during the 30 miles journey. Instead, she directly landed 30 miles away from the Qingdu River. She wanted to kill him in one shot, which showed her arrogance as the #1 demon of Beimeng. Mad Monk swayed and ran all the way. Occasionally, there were a few passers-by who heard the useless song. When they looked up, they were already a few miles away. Luo Yang stood proudly with the long-bearded ichthyosaur circling around her leisurely. When the dragon wall flipped, she was stabbed in the heart by the bastard who thought he had succeeded and fell into the river channel. Little did he know that Luo Yang returned to the mausoleum that had not seen the light of day for 800 years. Previously, Su Fengnian only saw the first floor of the mausoleum and already felt that it was magnificent. Who knew that Luo Yang skillfully opened the mechanism and went down. There were countless talismans on the ground, which were the best work of the ancient necromancers. Even the current Qi cultivator gurus would sigh in admiration when they saw it. The two ichthyosaurs circled around a coffin for nearly 1,000 years. After Luo Yang left the mausoleum of the Emperor Qin under the Yellow River, she secretly went to the Arctic tundra. She just happened to catch the big fish of the North Sea transforming from the Kuan to the Peng. Tuoba waited for dozens of years, but she still ruined half of the good thing. Tuoba once told the Empress in secret that when he took the weapon, it would be the day when hundreds of thousands of soldiers of Tuoba's personal army marched south. As a result, not to mention Tuoba Bodhisattva was enraged. Even the Empress, the Son of Heaven, who originally had high regard for Luoyang, was enraged. For the spider web in Li Mixie's hand, not to mention 100 catchers and 30 butterflies were dispatched. Other than a section of willow, all the other 6 lifting poles and double cocoons were dispatched in full force. Li Mixie personally arranged all the details of the hunt and kill. Beheading Luoyang was a must. Unfortunately, back then, Luoyang had slaughtered his way to northern Mang's capital. That time, he had even slaughtered his way all the way to the border. He had even taken a detour midway to meet Li Mixie, who was protected by layers upon layers of armored cavalry, from afar. Luoyang's actions, compared to Lu Songtao's roaming of the Jianghu 100 years ago, could be said to be in no way inferior. It was just that the Jianghu far away in Liang did not have the chance to hear about this secret history. Lu Songtao did not carry his sword. The long sword made of ordinary material floated in the air and walked side by side with him. One day, he would become an immortal swordsman of the land. It was said that there was nothing in the world that could not be used as a sword. However, when he really had a sword in his hand, regardless of whether it was a bamboo sword, a wooden sword, or an iron sword, they all had a completely different aura. Especially in a fight between people of the same realm, the difference between having a sword in hand and not having a sword in hand was even more incomparable. The sword was a spiritual object. Otherwise, the essence of the Wu family's sword would not be the Rui sword embryo. Even when a skilled swordsmith forged a sword, the Rui sword embryo was only the first layer. The Rui sword embryo was the most important part. It was unknown which senior had joked about the fight between experts. It was like two shrews dressed in silk clothes fighting. Both of them wanted to tear the other's clothes apart, but silk clothes were dense and sturdy. The reason why swordsmen could become a glamorous profession in Jianghu for thousands of years was because they had a pair of scissors in their hands. They could tear the clothes apart with half the effort. If they were barehanded, they would first have to break the dense satin with their fists and loosen the threads. One of the 4 grandmasters of the previous generation, Fu Jiang Hongjia, was not in the 3 sections. However, he possessed the physique of the great Vajra realm and the comprehension of the celestial state. Furthermore, he wore a talisman armor. It was tantamount to wearing the thickest clothes in the world. The ferocity of Han Diaosi lay in his ability to peel silk from a cocoon. Not only could he tear a Vajra realm physique with his bare hands, he could also cut off the resonance between a celestial state expert and the world. 4 martial artists outside the 3 sects, there was no doubt that the 4 realms of first pin were ascending in order. The Xian finger was lower than the celestial state, and the difference was far greater than the Vajra finger and the Xian finger. There were many cases of people in the latter 2 realms killing each other. Han Diaosi was able to use the Xian finger to kill a celestial state expert, which made him comparable to Dong Tai's Xian finger. Unfortunately, after the death of Catman outside the Shenwu city, there was no one to inherit his cultivation method. It became a masterpiece. Regardless of Catman's character, it was regarded as the greatest flaw of the Xian finger in the world. When top experts, especially first pin experts, exchanged blows, there was a sense of cherishing life. Exchanging pointers was far more than fighting to the death. Luo Yang in white was obviously an exception who did not cherish the hard-won realm. Without exception, she fought against Tuoba under the eyes of the Empress of Beimang, fought against Dong Tai outside Dunhuang, fought against the former 4th in the world Hong Jingyan at the chess and sword music school, and fought against Tuoba on the back of the giant fish in the northernmost ice field. Without exception, all of them involved their opponents and forced them to fight to the death. This time was no exception. The 2 of them collided. Luo Yang allowed Lu Songtao's sword to pass through her palm. She slapped Lu Songtao's forehead with her palm. The 2 of them each retreated several zhang. Luo Yang's arm, which she used to block the sword, drooped and dripped blood incessantly. Lu Songtao was bleeding from his 7 orifices. He was not feeling well either. The long sword shattered. The spiritual aura of the dragonfish beside Luo Yang also collapsed. Luo Yang shot a glance at the middle-aged monk who was no longer crazy. She retreated and swept away. She said indifferently, "I'll take another blow from you 100 li away." Lu Songtao smiled and sucked in a breath. The blood flowed back into his orifices like a sword returning to its sheath. He took large strides forward, stepping over the scattered broken swords on the ground. He condensed a complete sword. This time, he held the sword in his hand. There was a city 100 li away. Luo Yang in white stood below the western city wall. The person came and the sword came. A sword aura as thick as a mountain peak. When Luo Yang stood still, she was already outside the eastern city wall. The city was forcibly torn into 2 halves by the sword aura and Luo Yang. The city wall was split. On this line, dust flew everywhere. A shopkeeper selling rouge and face powder stared with wide eyes at the messy shop that was split into 2 halves. Another shopkeeper was pretending to be cultured with a good friend in the backyard of a private house. They were boiling wine and enjoying the lake scenery. They saw the lake water churning, the courtyard wall breaking, and the pavilion collapsing with a loud bang. Everyone's mink hats were blown to the ground by the strong wind. They looked at each other in dismay. A young master who was strolling on the street with a servant fell into the ravine that appeared out of nowhere with his horse. The man and the horse howled. The servants thought they saw ghosts in broad daylight. They shrank back, not daring to go into the ravine to save people. Lu Songtao outside the western city wall laughed loudly. He ran forward along the crack in the wall. Destroying a city with one blow is not enough. Let's destroy a country with one blow. Luo Yang stroked the dragonfish's body that appeared out of thin air and smiled slightly. They entered the city again. Get out! She kicked Lu Songtao, who entered the city with her, back to the western city wall. Luo Yang stood still in the center of the city, her white clothes fluttering. Lu Songtao's body was bent like a bow outside the western city wall. He straightened his back and slowly stood still. His eyes were a little cloudy, like a jar of white wine that had been stored in the cellar for many years. When someone shook it hard, the dregs at the bottom of the jar floated up. Lu Songtao shook his head and rushed into the city again. He came to a north-south street that was cut by something in the middle of the city. Near the bottomless ravine, a plain-looking woman sat on the roadside with lingering fear. She looked around and found a small hairpin that fell to the ground from her hair. She was about to bend down to pick it up. She came from a small family and the hairpin was her favorite item that she had saved up for several months to buy. If she lost it, she would be distressed for a long time. She suddenly saw a hand pick up the hairpin for her. She looked up and saw a man in a monk's robe. His cassock was tattered and he was so poor that he could not afford shoes. She was timid and shy. She blushed and did not know what to do. The monk smiled and handed the hairpin back to her. He whispered, "That year, she put her hairpin in my hair bun and made fun of me for having a small hairpin in my hair bun." The strange monk in the woman's eyes stood up and said blankly, "It's a pity that you are not her and I am not me." Lu Songtao, who was in a trance, exhaled a long breath and lowered his head. There was no sword in his hand. That year, he saw her too late and put her naked body in his arms. He took off his clothes and wrapped her up, then carried her back to Zhulu. Lu Songtao tore off one of his sleeves and shook his wrist. A sword appeared in his hand. He smiled at the woman and said, "Take a look at this sword for her." The woman, who had never experienced such a thrilling scene, was frightened. She nodded blankly and was about to cry. Lu Songtao's face was full of tears. He said with a hoarse voice, "That year, the three of us were free and unfettered in Jianghu. Zhao Huangqiao betrayed you but not the country. You betrayed Lu Songtao. Lu Songtao betrayed Zhulu Mountain but not you." Chapter 8:12. Lu Songtao raised his arm and lifted his sword. His two fingers on his other hand gently brushed the sword with a determined gaze. In the city, Luo Yang broke off a strand of dragon whisker from a dragonfish. She twirled her fingers and the dragon whisker wrapped around her arm. It was obvious that even she did not have much confidence in blocking the sword with her bare hands. At this moment, a person appeared at the end of the street where Lu Songtao was standing. He dashed into the city and slowed down when he saw the gray-robed monk. He walked forward slowly and stopped 10 feet away from him. He sneered, "Is it really the devil cult leader Lu Songtao? Why are you getting worse and worse? What kind of hero are you to compete with a woman?" Lu Songtao, who originally did not want to pay attention to the uninvited guest, turned his head. The young master had an indescribable charm. His hands were in his sleeves and he was as handsome as a tree in the wind. Behind him, there was a majestic man escorting him. Lu Songtao smiled. What was going on with the Jianghu today? Why were the talents of the Jianghu sprouting like bamboo shoots after the rain? Although this white-haired young man had used an otherworldly item to cross the threshold of celestial phenomenon and could not be considered genuine, if his foundation was not good enough, how could a small pond contain a flood? The man behind the white-haired young man was not to be underestimated. Together with the Wudong Taoist who spoke at the riverbank, Lu Songtao could not help but sigh. If the Jianghu around 100 years ago chose 10 people to fight to the death, the difference in the outcome would not be too great. However, if 50 people were chosen, the Jianghu he was in back then would not have any chance of winning. Lu Songtao held his sword in his hand and was ready to attack. His sword will was torrential and the sea of qi around him was rolling over and over. He forcefully suppressed it and smiled at the young man. It is not easy to have such skills at such a young age. Lu Songtao will not lower himself to your level today. A true gentleman does not speak when watching a chess game. It is fine if you want to watch the battle, but if you interfere, don't blame me for pointing my sword at you. Young man, let me give you a piece of advice. The otherworldly item hiding in the dark is already on the verge of collapse. Don't let your emotions affect your decisions. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, Lu Songtao's boundless sword intent instantly vanished into thin air. Lu Songtao didn't make any movements, but the sword in his hand had already flowed east like a great river. The earth trembled and the city shook for a long time, causing the commoners in the city to mistakenly think that the underground hidden dragon was causing trouble, causing a violent earthquake. They all fled from their houses to flat ground. 20 zhang away, Luo Yang's heart was pierced by a sword. Lu Songtao had only struck once, but he had aged 10 years in the blink of an eye. 100 years ago, Lu Songtao had never used his sword. Perhaps he was the loneliest old sword immortal in the world of martial arts. 100 years later, his sword strike was so powerful that it could destroy a mountain. Lu Songtao was neither sad nor happy. He only looked at the white-clothed woman who would stand at the top of the Jianghu 100 years later. Then he exclaimed in surprise, "Don't tell me you're someone with a different heart." Luo Yang stood up from the ruins and sneered, "It's my turn." Lu Songtao glanced at the white-haired young man, then turned to look at the demoness who had shaken Beimeng twice. He shook his head and sighed. Fellow sufferers sympathize with each other. One has to rely on unorthodox ways to steal cultivation, while the other uses external objects to prolong her life. Both of them have no choice but to tamper with fate. You don't have much lifespan left to begin with. Even if you can stop me, Lu Songtao, for 300 li in the end, you won't die much later than an old man who has lived for more than 60 years. Why bother? The person who came was naturally Su Fengyan, who was worried about nothing. After he leaped onto the city wall, he stopped and looked into the distance. At first, he had no intention of interfering. He didn't even care about going to Xianxia Academy first. After he received the secret letter from the Blue Falcon, he took a detour to come here, afraid that he would miss this great battle. Even if it wasn't a once-in-a-century battle, after all, the battle between the old man wearing the sheepskin fur coat and Wang Xinji in the Eastern Sea was a battle between two cult masters of the devil cult. No matter how you looked at it, it could be considered a great battle that was hard to come by in decades. However, he didn't expect that the so-called white-clothed man from Zhulu Mountain in the letter was the Luoyang woman who died in the Dragon Wall River Channel in the northern Meng. When he approached the city wall, the connected otherworldly item let Su Fengyan know that Luo Yang had sensed his presence. Su Fengyan didn't want to run away. He was a little scared when he saw Lu Songtao raise his sword. He jumped down the city wall in a hurry and tried to boost his courage. Anyway, he had a half-baked celestial state cultivation with him. If he joined in the fun and spoke some words of conscience to the old leader, he wouldn't be killed on the spot. You, Lu Songtao, are the former leader of the devil cult, busy competing with the whole world. Why do you have to make things difficult for people like us who don't mingle in Jianghu? Besides, I'm used to the bitter days of being despised by everyone in northern Meng. Once things get tense, I'm not that slow either. Chapter 8:13. Luo Yang, who had been moving forward, did not even look at Su Fengyan. His flirtatious glances were wasted on a blind person. If Luo Yang was a woman who could be judged with common sense, she would not be Luo Yang. Even Lu Songtao, who had experienced many hardships, felt somewhat puzzled. This woman clearly did not need to destroy both jade and common stone. She was too lazy to determine the winner and loser. So, did she want to directly fight to the death? Lu Songtao raised his head and laughed loudly. He actually had a joyful feeling as if he had finally met someone who understood him after 100 years. He tore off his remaining sleeve and a second sword appeared in his hand. Perhaps it was because of the existence of the sword immortal, the devil, and the otherworldly item, but due to the resonance between heaven and man, it caused a strange phenomenon. Some snowflakes seemed to be drifting down sparsely from the sky. Su Fengyan raised his head and looked. It was a gloomy evening when the sky wished for snow. Could he drink a sword without a sword? Lu Songtao seemed to have exchanged 10 years of his life for a sword. However, compared to the first sword, this time even Su Fengyan suspected that the sword would weaken again. The next moment, Su Fengyan did not even have the time to curse. No wonder Lu Songtao's sword was slack. The tip of the sword pointed at Luo Yang at first, but when it was only a few feet away from her hand, it turned around and rushed towards him. Yuan Zhuozong moved even earlier than Su Fengyan. He grabbed a wooden stick from the street to make a spear and ran forward in big strides. However, the flying sword was faster than thunder. Several of Su Fengyan's 12 swords were destroyed by Han Diaoxi, but it was not difficult to build a sword formation thunder pool. Before Yuan Zhuozong arrived, Lu Songtao's fast invisible sword had already broken the thunder pool that was said to be insurmountable. For a moment, the flying sword was flying randomly. Su Fengyan's state of mind was as calm as water. He raised his hand to shake the Kunlun Mountains. This mountain-destroying sword made Su Fengyan, who had almost perfect defense, slide back continuously. The chaotic sword chi was like countless ice alls, fiercely smashing his face. The flying sword kept hitting the sword that he could not see its real body. Su Fengyan was still retreating. The sword that the sword immortal exchanged with 10 years of his life made Su Fengyan suffer a lot. Fortunately, Yuan Zhuozong held the stick with both hands and simply waved it down. A big pit appeared on the ground in front of Yuan Zhuozong. There were sawdust and scraps of clothes. His clothes and sword were destroyed. Su Fengyan stood still and stretched out his finger to wipe off the bloodstain caused by the ruthless sword chi. Lu Songtao, who had made up his mind at the last minute to switch people to kill, was not feeling good either. He exchanged a kick with Luo Yang, but Luo Yang's figure did not retreat at all. Lu Songtao had already fallen more than 10 zhang away, landing heavily on the ground. He rolled several times before slapping the ground with his palm. He swayed and floated up. Luo Yang was like a gangrene attached to the bone. Lu Songtao had just stabilized himself when her arms swept across his abdomen. His body was several feet above the ground. Without waiting for him to fly out horizontally, Luo Yang stomped on his abdomen again. The kite with a broken string was directly 7-8 zhang away. This time, Lu Songtao did not fall. His toes hovered in the air a few times like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, gently landing on the edge of the gully. One wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step, one wrong step after another. Luo Yang's palm pushed out during the long sweep. Lu Songtao's expression turned serious. He leaned back, dodging Luo Yang's flying sword, which had fallen into the palm of his hand at some unknown time. Luo Yang's palm turned into an elbow, often knocking Lu Songtao to the ground. With a kick, Lu Songtao directly crashed into a distant wall. When he stood up from the dust, the corner of his mouth was oozing with a ghastly black clot of blood. He smiled freely. With 2 fingers, he cut open his abdomen. Gripping the tip of the sword, he pulled out the treacherous flying sword that had pierced his body from behind. Lu Songtao looked at the white-haired young man with a profound mind. Indeed, I did not waste my sword strike on you. Lu Songtao did not look angry at all. Instead, he looked delighted. He gently tossed the translucent flying sword back to Su Fengyan. It was not easy to nurture a sword embryo. Wei Chao could not be called a sword immortal. Sui Xiegu, who was as young as you, was not vulgar. Unfortunately, I did not know if he was dead or alive. Otherwise, you could have learned the sword from him. Most people in the pugilistic world believe that there is no second place in martial arts. They are afraid of being stepped on by others and losing their integrity in their later years. However, the great swordsmen are not afraid of being overtaken by their juniors. They are only afraid that the swordsman's legacy will deteriorate from generation to generation. Kid, what's your name? Su Fengyan asked carefully. Sui Xiegu. Do you like to eat swords? Lu Songtao smiled and nodded. Back then, this kid said that he wanted to challenge all the strongest swordsmen in the world and eat all the best swords in the world. When I went into seclusion to practice my swordplay, it was this defeated opponent who became braver with every setback that guarded my seclusion. Su Fengnian took a deep breath. Old man Sui has a great enmity with me. However, he clearly distinguishes between kindness and hatred. I am indebted to him for his sword strike. Lu Songtao waved his hand. That's between the two of you. It has nothing to do with me. Luo Yang glanced at Su Fengnian. The latter immediately fell silent. Luo Yang flicked her finger lightly and an item flew towards Lu Songtao. The latter caught the item with a complicated expression. He asked softly, "It's you? How is that possible?" Luo Yang was expressionless. Lu Songtao, who had originally planned to fight to the death, sighed and flicked the item back. He had a strange expression. So what if I see him? He won't be that person anymore. Luo Yang's expression was still cold. If there's nothing else, then get lost. Lu Songtao clutched his stomach and laughed. Then he disappeared in a flash. As he left the city and headed east, this demon who had stirred up a reign of terror 100 years ago muttered to himself, "So there's someone more foolish than me." Luo Yang put on a fake smile and stared at Su Fengnian. "Woman, you really hold a grudge. Why don't you say that I took Lu Songtao's sword strike for you for no reason?" Su Fengnian was thinking about how to escape when Luo Yang opened her mouth and said with a smile, "The Yellow River Strike. This little girl will engrave it in her heart." Su Fengnian's hair stood on end when he heard the words, "little girl." Unexpectedly, the demoness Beimeng lowered her head and covered her chest with her hand. She mocked herself. Where did the heart come from? Chapter 8:14. Perhaps because it was close to the Shangyin Academy, the tea houses and taverns in the city all had elegant names. It was said that on the walls of any old inn, there were fragments of poems written by Confucians of different dynasties. The Sharp Snow restaurant was located in a secluded area in the city. When it snowed, few people went out to suffer. Plus, there was an unknown natural disaster or man-made disaster in the city, so the business was naturally bleak. The shopkeeper was depressed, thinking about when he could save enough money to buy the small house he had chosen long ago. This era was peaceful, without the turmoil of the spring and autumn period, so it was not a bad idea to buy more houses. His wife always complained that the dowry he prepared for his daughter was too little and could not support their reputation. Compared with the neighboring Song family, the shopkeeper was too far behind. As the head of the family, although he worked hard all year round to make a living, he could not say much. However, after working hard every day, he could go home and drink a cup of tea made by his daughter, so he did not complain anymore. He hesitated whether he should sell the calligraphy and painting that he had treasured for many years. He bought it from a southern Tang survivor who had wandered to another place at a high price. Now it could be sold at a high price, but he still liked it from the bottom of his heart. The shopkeeper sighed. Now that he was middle-aged, everything seemed to have come to an end. He looked up at the snowy street outside the building and pulled up his sleeves. When he saw the two of them enter the tea house, the shopkeeper hurriedly welcomed them, afraid that he would miss out on this deal that was made out of nothing. He didn't care about his reputation and smiled warmly. In addition to the best tea before the rain, we don't lack good wine. What would you like to drink? When the shopkeeper recognized the faces of the two people, he was somewhat stunned. The handsome young man was still all right. He had a warm smile on his face and looked very warm in the winter. With one look, one could tell that he was from a good family. However, the woman with a frosty face was frightening. The shopkeeper subconsciously shrank his neck. Fortunately, for some reason, the white-haired young man was very understanding. After patting the snow off his shoulder, he said with a gentle smile, "Shopkeeper, I'll have to trouble you to warm up a jar of wine. Make it as strong as you can. If you have a stove, bring it over and put it under the table. We can add some money." The shopkeeper quickly rubbed his hands and said with a smile, "It's free, it's free. It's only right." Su Fengnian and Luo Yang were sitting by the window. Lu Songtao had left the city inexplicably. It seemed that Luo Yang was about to deal with him. But when he and Yuan Zuozong were about to fight to the death, she said she was going to drink. Su Fengnian didn't let Yuan Zhuozong follow them. Since she said to drink, Su Fengnian would drink generously. Drinking with a gentleman would most likely lead to death. However, drinking with Luo Yang would most likely lead to a better life. The wine was served on the table and the stove was set up. The two of them drank together. Su Fengnian raised his cup and took a small sip. With a slurp, he leaned lazily against the back of the chair and asked softly, "Bodhisattva Tuoba has been waiting for 30 years for you to spoil the good thing? What's going on?" Luo Yang didn't raise her glass to drink. She remained silent. Su Fengnian asked again, "You went to Zhulu Mountain to become the hierarch? Did you send Lu Linggui and the others to let me become a marquis? Chao Changqing is willing to be a guest of your devil sect and Zhulu Mountain is willing to contribute to West Chu's revival? But to be honest, I don't think West Chu's revival will be possible. When Su Shao destroyed West Chu, he didn't divide the north and the south because he saw the general trend. He didn't proclaim himself as the emperor because people were disheartened. But once he did, those experienced soldiers would die for the dragon throne under his butt. Su Shao had always been a calculator. He didn't do business at a loss. The current emperor of Liang dynasty's Zhao family is not an incapable ruler. He's diligent and self-disciplined to the point that it makes people's hair stand on end. Even if Chao Changqing becomes a saint, it won't affect the general situation. Perhaps Li Yang wanted West Chu to revive their country with great fanfare. Burning down an entire granary, compared to burning down a bunch of scattered weeds, it was much easier to do. If my guess is not wrong, West Chu's revival will be successful in the beginning, but in the end it will be difficult for them to escape the imperial court's net. This kind of wicked thing, Yuan Benshi was able to come up with it. The emperor of Zhao family was also able to nod his head. Zhang Julu, who is already unrivaled in the struggle between factions, can devise a perfect strategy. Luo Yang was still resting with her eyes closed. She reached out a finger and lightly tapped the table. There was no rhythm to the tapping. A moment later, Su Fengnian suddenly felt suffocated. Blood gushed out of his throat. He quickly broke the connection with the spirit of the red robe and gradually regained his clarity. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. It's very similar to the finger xian of Catman Han Xianxia. You're really good at everything. Luo Yang dipped her finger into the teacup filled with wine. Using Xiaozhuan, she wrote the name Luo Yang on the table. Su Fengnian smiled. I know. After the Qin dynasty unified the world, the capital was changed to Luo Yang. Luo Yang raised the corner of her mouth. Her face was full of undisguised sarcasm. She asked, "You really know?" Su Fengnian was rendered speechless by this idiotic question. However, this demoness in front of him had fought with the new number 2 ranked Bodhisattva Tuoba and the number 3 ranked new sword god Deng Tea. She had even dragged down the number 4 ranked Hong Jingyan. Today, she had even fought with Lu Songtao head-on. In the future, she would most likely have to fight with that old bastard in Martial Emperor City. Could it be that she would only stop after she had beaten up all the top 10 martial artists? How domineering of a madwoman was she? Su Fengnian lamented in his heart. Why did he have to meet her in Beimeng? Where did the pure and innocent Huang Baozhuang from the city wall go? Su Fengnian voiced the question that had been puzzling him the most recently. Zhulu Mountain appeared at the end of the Qin dynasty. As the old saying goes, when Qin lost its deer, the world chased after it. Could it be that this Zhulu Mountain, which evolved into a demonic sect in later years, is a remnant of the Qin dynasty, just like the Beimeng princess tomb? Luo Yang laughed wantonly. Remnant of the Qin dynasty, this comment really hits the nail on the head. Su Fengnian laughed with no sincerity. Luo Yang was too lazy to pay attention to him. She said, Lu Songtao was not nailed to the Dragon Lake by the Dragon Tiger Mountain using the heavenly power of several generations of ancestors. Instead, he went to Lantua Mountain to shave his hair and become a monk. He hid there for nearly 100 years. He should have let go of the tragedy of the past. Logically speaking, he should have put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha, occupying a place in the Buddhist kingdom of the West. However, for some reason, he was possessed by the devil. Lantua Mountain, which is known for its strict discipline, let him go. Even Li Xiaoxin, the Buddha of the Central Plains, did not try to stop him. This is even more against common sense. Lu Songtao, who is not a monk or learned to a mountain scheme, may achieve the same goal through different means. Su Fengnian asked tentatively, "You are telling me this because you still want to drag me to Zhulu Mountain?" Luo Yang did not admit or deny it. She was speaking in riddles. Su Fengnian was honest with her. "As long as you are not in a hurry to kill me." Luo Yang took a sip of wine. Her eyes were playful. "You can even kill Han Diaoxi, one of the 3 great devils of the spring and autumn period. Do you think you can't kill me? If there is a first time, there will be a second time. With your cold temperament, if you don't kill me on the Yellow River, you will not be able to sleep well." Su Fengnian laughed as he poured the wine. "I was lucky that the killer cat did not eat the sword of the great ancestor of the sword sect, Sui Xiegu. I was the one who was killed by Han Diaoxi. Killing a celestial being like you? I have nothing better to do. As long as you don't settle old scores with me, to be honest, I don't mind going to Zhulu Mountain to be a nominal marquis. But let me say this first. I will not meddle in the restoration of West Chu. I admire Chao Changqing from the bottom of my heart. But one thing is another. I don't even have a good grasp of the land in Bailiang. I don't have the ambition and ability to fight for the world." Luo Yang showed an impatient expression. She spun the porcelain cup with 2 fingers and sneered. Lu Songtao was right about one thing. The wine was still warm, but the atmosphere could not be any colder. Su Fengnian saw that she did not want to say more. He quietly drank a few cups of wine, paid the waiter and left the tea house of sharp snow. Luo Yang did not stop him. She dipped her hand in the wine and wrote 2 words on the table. Xianxia. Luo Yang said calmly, "So it's all 3 of them. He doesn't know anything, and she knows everything. It was not like this originally." This devil did something that no one would have guessed. She put her chin on the table and closed her eyes. She looked like a tired, ordinary woman who could not wait for the person she liked for a long time. Chapter 8:15. There is one more chapter. P.S. A new WeChat public platform has been opened. Go to Sina Weibo and scan the QR code or search Fenghua 1985. There are several book giveaways. It was a windy and snowy night. Su Fengnian stood at the door. There were no pedestrians on the street paved with blue stones. He held his hands and breathed in the air. It was full of the smell of alcohol. Seeing Su Fengnian come out of Jianxua tea house safe and sound, Yuan Zuozong, who was already the commander of Bailiang cavalry, was relieved. They looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengnian and Yuan Zuozong sat in the carriage. They had to leave the city before the gate was closed. This time, they hurried to watch the battle without any worries. Great Ancestor Gu, Huang Shang, and others had secretly rushed to Bailiang under the arrangement of Chu Lushan. It was said that the quarry mountain was almost uprooted from the ground. There were only some unaffiliated artists left. These people were lucky to occupy the place. As for the departure of Su Zhan, Zhou Qinghu and others, Su Fengnian did not care. But the young man, Li Huai, was said to insist on going north with Huang Shang to see the scenery of the frontier fortress. He did not travel far because his parents were dead. Since his parents were not in this world, this young man would not have to worry about his family. Therefore, Su Fengnian did not stop him. In the carriage, Yuan Zuozong wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Su Fengnian didn't regard him as an outsider and told him the general situation. Yuan Zuozong was amazed after hearing it. He didn't expect Lu Songtao's identity to be so shocking. Not only was he the former hierarch of the devil cult, but he was also an eminent monk who should have reached the Buddha realm on Mount Lantua. Lu Songtao vividly proved that the devil Buddha could be created and destroyed with a single thought. However, what surprised Yuan Zuozong more was that White Luo Yang, the first devil of Beiming, came to Liangjiang Lake to be the 10th hierarch of Mount Zhulu. The result was a battle of 90. It was really unpredictable. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain and looked at the tea house in the distance in the wind and snow. He smiled bitterly and said, "Why do you get stabbed in the heart every day? If it were anyone else, how could they sit down and drink with others? They would have long hidden away to recuperate from the pain. Only you are worthy of the name Luo Yang." Su Fengnian repeated the 2 words, Luo Yang, and murmured, When the Qin dynasty was at its peak, that man who was hailed as the greatest emperor of all time ignored all criticism and insisted on changing the name of the capital to Luoyang. Later generations all said that this was against the natural order, and this was the foreshadowing of the destruction of the Qin dynasty for 3 generations. Afterwards, for a woman whose name was not recorded in the annals of history, he lit 1,800 fire beacons, causing him to be viewed as extremely muddle-headed. No one knew what kind of beauty could make Great Qin's emperor do such a thing. One woman accompanied him to conquer the world, and the other woman buried the world. If I were born 800 years ago, I would really like to ask that Emperor Qin face to face which one he loved more, his new lover and his old lover. Yuan Zhuzong laughed and did not answer. Yuan Baixiong, who was as famous as Lu Xianxia in the spring and autumn period, had never had any woman whom he loved. It seemed that he had never been troubled by love. Outside the window, a falcon flew towards the curtain. Su Fengnian lifted the curtain with a smile and untied the narrow bamboo joint from the falcon's claws, allowing the falcon to fly away. After reading the secret letter, he frowned and said worriedly, "I don't know what happened to Wang Xiaoping. She fought with Lu Songtao and exchanged swords with him. This Taoism's first talisman sword seemed to be badly injured. Fortunately, Lu Songtao did not kill her. Instead, he took Wang Xiaoping and went to the east together. I don't think this is mutual appreciation. Even if it is temporary, Lu Songtao is crazy. Now that Wudong Mountain finally has Wang Xiaoping after the bull rider, she may be killed by Lu Songtao. But how can I stop them?" Yuan Zhuzong shook his head and said, "You can't stop them, and you don't have to. Whether Wang Xiaoping lives or dies, it is up to fate. One is crazy, and the other is a fool. Maybe this is a fated encounter." Senior Li Chungang had Dong Tai to take over his sword. Lu Songtao, who has quietly become a swordsman on land 100 years ago, may also want a newcomer in Jianghu to take over his sword. To be honest, I used to use a saber instead of a sword in military battles. Otherwise, I may be a swordsman now. The reason why the way of the sword can stand tall in Jianghu for thousands of years and stand alone to compete with the sages of the 3 sects does have its own unique charm. Your Highness, it is a pity that you don't practice swordsmanship. Su Fengnian said with self-mockery, "You can't be distracted when practicing swordsmanship. I don't dare to practice it at all. If I give up halfway, I will be scolded and laughed to death." Yuan Zhuzong didn't speak anymore. He didn't want to get involved in such personal affairs. There were so many outstanding generals in Bailiang. He was afraid that he was the one who didn't know how to form cliques and pursue personal interests. Even Xia of Bailiang didn't dare to compete with Yuan Zhuzong on this point, let alone Zhong Hongwu and Yan Wenwan, who had made great contributions for many years. But the more so, when Yuan Zhuzong took over Zhong Hongwu's cavalry alone, no one dared to make trouble. The trap set by Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang for Zhong Hongwu fell through. Zhong Hongwu, who had taken off his armor and returned to his farm, was unusually well behaved. Su Fengnian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He could only sigh that Yuan Zhuzong was too domineering. Chu Lushan was the governor-general of Bailiang, who was only under the governor and administrator of Bailiang. It was said that many people were ready to make trouble in private. This was probably an unintentional willow growing in shade. Chen Shiliang, who was vaguely the chief aide after Li Yishan in Mount Qingliang, had several social engagements with Chu Lushan recently. However, Su Beiji, who was born in a rich family, was the opposite and had a good relationship with many poor people. A domestic carp and a wild carp. Were they secretly competing to see who could jump the dragon gate first? Su Fengnian touched his forehead. Even an upright official couldn't solve a family dispute. It was a headache. When Yuan Zhuzong raised his hand, he caught a glimpse of a few red ropes which were like vivid red snakes lingering around His Highness's arm. Yuan Zhuzong smiled knowingly. The falling snow was like cotton. Outside the curtain, the teenager was humming a useless song which had been spread all over the country. It was just that he was out of tune. Chapter 8:16. Shangyin Academy was a beautiful place, but many people did not know that the academy that had lasted for thousands of years was actually a private school. The rulers who had controlled the Shangyin Academy for generations, whether they were wise or foolish rulers, had never tried to interfere with the Xianxia Academy. Perhaps they had made some small moves, but in the end, they were all unsuccessful. Xianxia Academy had always been outside of the imperial court. It was known as the academy that as long as there was a floor, a book, and a person, there would be an endless stream of literature in the Central Plains. Even the Liang dynasty, the only one who had unified the Central Plains after the Great Qin dynasty, treated the Xianxia Academy with respect. Although it was just a formality, it did not hinder the support of the Imperial College and the Yao family school behind the scenes to compete with the Xianxia Academy, hoping to create a tripartite scholarly landscape. However, on the surface, they still gave the Xianxia Academy a lot of special favors. For example, the Prince Zhao Kai, who had unfortunately died suddenly, had once been an apprentice in the academy. The Grand Chancellor of the academy was also half an imperial preceptor. Now, even if the imperial court had opened the imperial examination to select scholars, and the imperial college had diverted many scholars away from the Xianxia Academy still deserved to be the leader of the literary world. In the past 2 years, there was a new female chancellor in the academy who lectured on music. The students all liked to respectfully address her as Mr. Fish and flocked to her like a flock of ducks. There were as many as a few hundred chancellors in the academy, but half of them were working behind closed doors and delving into private studies. Only about 160 of them were worthy of the title Mr. Jishang, opening up a forum to give lectures, each specialized in a particular field. During this period of time, there were many Mr. Jishang lectures that were completely deserted. They were secretly ridiculed by the students of Jishang for being no more than 2 or 3 cats and dogs, playing the lute to a cow. She was good at music, and she taught in simple terms. She was not a 2-legged bookshelf fishing for fame. It was rumored that her father was a pillar of the Xianxia Academy, and her mother was a female sword attendant who was highly praised by the late emperor of West Chu. After the destruction of West Chu, it was reasonable for a woman with a desolate background to seek shelter in the academy. In addition, she was so beautiful and talented. Naturally, people admired her knowledge, adored her appearance, and pitied her family background. In the past 2 years, many students had been thinking about her day and night and were intoxicated with her. A gentle and graceful snowfall came unexpectedly. The snowflakes were not big, and they were timid and gentle. Compared to the majestic snow in early winter, it was much more pleasant. Today, Teacher Yu said that she wanted to admire the snow, so classes were suspended for the day. This greatly disappointed the students who had come because of her reputation. The academy was built along the mountain, and there were 3 independent lakes that were not connected to each other. The Lotus Lake adjacent to Teacher Su Weisheng's small building had always been a forbidden area. After the building was empty, no one cared about it. Many small boats were tied to the shore of the fearless lake for the scholars to paddle across the lake. On the small boats, there was a stove for cooking wine and admiring the snow. It was a delightful thing, but with so many small boats, it was like the end of a chessboard. There were many chess pieces densely packed, and the beautiful thing was not as wonderful as expected. The other small and exquisite Buddha's Palm Lake was cold and cheerless. This was because the lake was privately owned. Even the rich students had the money to buy a pig's head, but they did not have the ability to enter the temple to burn incense. They could only look at the lake from afar and sigh. Within 100 feet of the shore of the Buddha's Palm Lake, unrelated people were not allowed to enter. At this moment, in the lakeside pavilion sat a beautiful woman holding a white cat. Her appearance was charming and enchanting, but her temperament was cold and distant, which made people want to conquer her even more. The woman was wrapped in a white fox fur coat that was worth thousands of gold pieces. The slightly bloated white cat was lazily nestled in the fox fur coat on her chest, yawning. It was very lovable. Inside and outside the pavilion, there were 7 or 8 young children playing around. They were all children of the Jishang teachers who had settled down and taught in the academy for many years. The owner of the Buddha's Palm Lake was lenient towards these naive children and never refused them to play by the lake. There were many speculations about this mysterious owner of the Buddha's Palm Lake. Some said that it was bought by the southern Tang imperial family with a large sum of money. Some said that it was the ancestral property of the Grand Preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji, and some even said that it was the private property of the descendants of the great Qin dynasty. There were many different opinions. As for why the Buddha's palm lake was named so strangely, there were also many interesting theories. The woman in the white fox fur coat who was holding the cat looked cold and suddenly smiled sweetly. She saw a little girl with goat horns who seemed to have been hit in the face by a boy who had a strong hand during a snowball fight. In a fit of anger, she rushed forward and kicked the boy who was laughing complacently. The boy, who had grown up with her childhood sweetheart, was directly thrown to the ground. The girl with goat horns was still angry. Seeing him struggling to get up, she slapped him to the ground again. The boy was stunned for a moment, then sat on the ground and cried loudly. The girl stood with her hands on her hips and looked around aggressively. She had the aura of a heroine who was invincible and lonely. The woman in the pavilion looked blurred and smiled softly. So lonely. Outside the pavilion, there was a comfortable voice that could naturally make women feel warm and comfortable. Mr. Fish can also feel lonely? The woman rubbed the white cat's head and frowned. When she turned her head, her smile had already disappeared. She saw a handsome face that was not unfamiliar to her. Xianxia was a young man whose name was given by his father. He was from the old West Chu. His grandfather, Duhai, was the favorite student of the national preceptor of West Chu, Sun Shiji. Xianxia's father almost wiped out Yuan Zuozong's entire army in the Battle of the Princess Tomb. Unfortunately, that battle was suspected to be an unfair victory. In the whole chess game, he still dragged down the general trend of West Chu. Later, in the Battle of the West Wall, this general died in battle. When his horse died, he dismounted from his horse and fought with it. He was stabbed dozens of times by Bailiang. In the Xianxia Academy, the orphans of West Chu were always superior. Xianxia had such a prominent and tragic family background, and he lived up to his family's teachings. When he was young, he was praised by Sun Shiji as a child prodigy. Everyone in the Xianxia Academy knew that he was determined to win Mr. Fish, who was also from West Chu. Most people were happy to see it happen. The woman in the fox fur coat smiled politely and did not say anything. Xianxia smiled and walked into the pavilion. He did not sit down but leaned against the pavilion pillar with a smile. He did not look at indecent things. He did not stop at the woman but looked up at the lake. In the eyes of ordinary girls, he was very unrestrained. There was an ancient tablet erected beside the Buddha's palm lake. It was the Xiaozhuan of the great Qin dynasty. A white-haired young man who had sneaked into the Xianxia Academy squatted in front of the tablet. He reached out to wipe away the snow, revealing 10 mottled words. Buddha's palm, the 5 fingers are the 5 sacred mountains. Most of the children were lively. They could not stay still and immediately noticed the stranger. The heroine with the goat horn who had kicked and punched the boy ran over, followed by a few playmates who were waving flags and cheering for her. The white-haired young man in white just happened to stand up and stretch. They looked at each other and stared at each other. The little girl looked vigilant and asked fiercely, "Who are you? What right do you have to come to the Buddha's palm lake?" At the pavilion, Xianxia also saw this scene and shook his head helplessly. He felt that the slender stranger was really a rascal. He did not know what he said, but the little girl in front of him was so angry that she punched and kicked him. The man bent down and reached out to touch the head of the goat horn girl. Such a childish young man, even if his hair turned white, what could he do? In the end, the bastard's loud shouts made the cultured and elegant Xianxia so angry that smoke almost came out of his 7 orifices. "Yue, how did our child grow so big in the blink of an eye? This child asked me who I was, and I said that I was her father. Then she hit me. How did you teach your child?" Chapter 8:17. If Xianxia was the kind of person who would destroy his manners in a fit of anger, then he wouldn't be able to enjoy such a high reputation in Xianxia Academy. The descendants of the Qi family were generals in West Chu, charging into enemy lines without fear of death. As civil officials, they were able to do as they pleased, and in the blink of an eye, they had become good-natured gentlemen. This was probably the secret of how the Qi family was able to prosper in West Chu. Xianxia's face was like jade, and there was a long sword hanging at his waist. It was normal for scholars to carry swords in the academy. There were even some comical students who carried large axes even though they clearly didn't have the strength to truss up a chicken. Xianxia Academy had always been lax about this. As long as they didn't use weapons to hurt people, they wouldn't stop them even if they carried all kinds of weapons in one go. But generally speaking, Wuxia scholars still carried swords. Xianxia watched as the man slowly walked over. Along the way, the goat-horned girl held a grudge and kept throwing snowballs at him. This guy wasn't angry at all, and allowed the snowballs to shatter on his body. As he approached the pavilion, he reached out his hand to pat the snow off his body, shook his head, and scraped his boots against the edge of the steps, as if he was afraid that people wouldn't know that he was an ignorant and incompetent scoundrel. The goat-horned girl was still nagging. The snow outside the pavilion was getting thicker, and she used all her strength to roll out a large snowball that she could hold with both hands. She wanted to give this detestable scoundrel a fatal blow, but because she ran too fast, the snowball was too heavy, and the steps were slippery. She staggered and was about to fall on the steps. The white-haired young man, whose back was facing the girl, nimbly stretched out his leg and tiptoed on her forehead, stopping her from falling forward. The little girl felt embarrassed in front of her playmate, so she grabbed this guy's leg and bit down hard. He jumped and turned around, bent down, and twisted her ear. The two of them were in a deadlock, competing in endurance. The two of them were using their eyes to bargain whether he should let go first or she should let go first. After all, the goat-horned girl was a little girl who couldn't bear pain. Her eyes were filled with tears, and she surrendered first. However, she was still pinched by this scoundrel who was only old but not virtuous. The little girl was heartbroken. She cried as if her innocence had been sullied by a flower thief. The naturally charming woman in fox fur put down the white cat and stood up to hug her, and only then did she feel a little better. Xianxia sighed in his heart. It was too ridiculous that he was jealous of this country bumpkin. However, he was still a little angry at this person's rude words. Xianxia asked calmly, "What are real man's words?" Unexpectedly, that bastard opened his mouth with a smile and hurled insults at him. "I can beat up 500 elegant gentlemen like you with one hand. Don't you think I'm a man?" Although the goat-horned lass in Yu Youwei's arms treated this guy as her greatest enemy today, she didn't have a good impression of Xianxia, who looked like a dog. Shuang was the father and mother of Sir Ji Shang, so she often criticized him in private. She couldn't stand him blindly worshipping the ancients and pretending to be noble and virtuous. Under this influence, the little girl thought of Xianxia as a sissy. When she heard that the stranger made Xianxia suffer, she immediately laughed out loud and secretly gave him a thumbs up. It went without saying that they were enemies, but if you really dared to teach this guy a lesson, this heroine would definitely clap her hands and cheer for you. Xianxia smiled freely. When an ordinary man gets angry, it'll only cause blood to splatter on the spot. This kind of quick revenge is of no help to the affairs of the country or the world. That person still used the vulgar words of a scoundrel. We're the only two men in the pavilion. This old man can break your 3 legs with one slap. How can you talk about strategizing thousands of li away? The goat-horned lass looked up and asked softly, "Big sister Yu, I've heard of a 3-legged toad. How come there's a 3-legged man?" Yu Youwei rubbed her little head and shook her head without saying anything. Xianxia's fingers secretly stroked the hilt of his sword. He smiled warmly and said, "This young master can really beat 500 Xianxia with one hand?" That person's expression turned serious. He asked in a low voice, "You're Xianxia?" Xianxia, who didn't look at Yu Youwei, smirked. He finally showed the innate arrogance of a prince of a wealthy clan. In front of outsiders, he had to maintain the demeanor of a gentleman taught by a saint. In front of this idiot, he might continue to provoke him if he only showed respect and humility. Xianxia had always been good at finding the right remedy for a problem. He knew that this kind of half-baked scion with shaky foundations would be arrogant just because they had a little money and power. They only knew how to bully the weak and fear the strong. They wouldn't remember if they didn't suffer the pain. Xianxia was able to be like a fish in water in Xianxia Academy and become friends with many Jishang teachers despite the difference in age. Other than his own talent and knowledge, the Qi family was still thriving even after the collapse of West Chu. The foundation of aristocratic clans was that they wouldn't fall in the face of the wind. Regardless of the rise and fall of the dynasty, they would still do their own research. The emperors and kings would still have to treat the wise with respect. Most of the top 10 wealthy clans of the spring and autumn period had withered because they were too tall and attracted too much wind. Su Xiao, that crippled butcher, was too ruthless. The Qi family, which was just a step or two away from becoming a top wealthy clan, had a much more unique advantage. They couldn't become a bird out of the forest, but they also wouldn't be ignored by the new dynasty. Qi Shens knew his own limitations. You can ignore me and say that I'm pretentious because I'm jealous, but you can't ignore the Qi family behind me. He didn't expect that the guy would immediately break his facade as soon as he spoke seriously. You're called Qi Shens? This is the first time I've heard of you. The name is pretty good, but you're not. The goat-horned girl originally thought that it was another person who wanted to curry favor with the rich and powerful. She was very disappointed, but when she heard this, she couldn't help but hold her stomach and laugh. She wanted to see the world in chaos. Her petite body rolled around happily in Yu Youwei's arms. Chapter 8:18. Even a clay bodhisattva would have some temper. Qi Shens had been humiliated time and time again in front of the woman he liked. The scholar cooked and swept the floor in a refined manner. He flicked the sword with his finger and sneered, "It doesn't matter if you've heard of Qi Shens or not. The sword at his waist is called Exquisite, and it comes from the Dongyue sword pool." For the first time, the man stopped being cynical and laughed softly. "I've heard of Li Chuangong's wooden bowl, Huang Lu of Huangjintu, Su of Gozhouzian of the Wu family's sword tomb, and Lu Baijia's Bashio. Exquisite? I've seen and touched a lot of women with exquisite figures." Qi Shens was so angry that he laughed. He didn't want to argue with him and directly used exquisite to teach this arrogant guy a lesson. At this moment, the woman in fox fur who was called Mr. Yu by the scholar sighed and said, "Stop fooling around." When Qi Shens was confused, Yu Youwei, who had always been indifferent to him, said softly, "Master Qi, I advise you not to use your sword. Otherwise, you'll embarrass yourself." This time, it was the condescending Qi Shens' turn to be on guard. With his family background, observing people was just a beginner's skill. He had already practiced it to the point of perfection. Although Mr. Yu knew that Qi Shen's swordsmanship was undoubtedly the best among the younger generation of Xianxia Academy, she still used the words, "embarrass yourself." It was like a hammer hitting a bell, making Qi Shens dizzy. Most of his competitive spirit dissipated. The most important thing now was to find a way out of the pavilion. A way out of the world was 100 times harder to find than a real pavilion. Fortunately, the white-haired young man smiled and said, "You and your sword are not good, but you have good taste. However, I advise you to stay away from Yu Youwei in the future. I won't argue with the Qi family." After saying this person brushed past them. With 2 fingers, he picked up the Wu Meinyang that was even more famous than the Linglong sword in Xianxia Academy and mischievously threw it out of the pavilion. The white cat rolled on the white snow. This scene stunned everyone who saw it. However, Yue, who was extremely fond of her beloved white cat, only glared resentfully and did not reprimand him. Qi Shens had no choice but to find a way out for himself. He said indifferently, "Since young master doesn't even care about the Qi family, then I'll wait and see." The goat-horned girl stared blankly at this unruly lecher. Then she sat down beside Sister Fish and smiled at her. "This heroine with fierce fists and peerless legs, please allow me to speak with your sister. Is that all right?" The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment. Then she left Yu Youwei's warm embrace and waved her small hand vigorously. Like a general commanding his troops, she skipped away from the pavilion. Permission granted. After leaving the pavilion, a bunch of small heads huddled together and whispered. Even the child who was kicked by the little heroine did not hold a grudge. He ran over and squatted together. Seeing that she was angry, he pretended to be stupid and laughed. The goat-horned girl snorted coldly with a fierce look. She turned her head and the corner of her mouth curled up into a slight smile. A little girl who saw Qi Shens as someone who would marry no one else but him when she grew up timidly spoke up for him. "Who is that guy? How can he be so rude?" Young Master Qi must be unwilling to lower himself to his level. Otherwise, with young Master Qi's swordsmanship, he would have fallen into the Buddha's palm lake in one strike. The goat-horned girl rolled her eyes and lectured her. Didn't you hear Sister Fish say that Qi Shens was asking for humiliation? You little love-struck fool, I told you that Qi Shens was an embroidered pillow. Why do you like him? His poems are just playthings promoted by his scoundrel friends. Even Master Su by the Lotus Lake commented that they were worthless. The little girl was angry, but she did not dare to refute. The goat-horned girl, who seemed to be very experienced in the ways of the world, clicked her tongue and said, "Although that white-haired man has a great enmity with me and will be beaten up by me sooner or later, I'm still very convinced right now. He said that he wouldn't be calculative with the Qi family, but not with Qi Shens. Listen how manly." A silly little chubby boy was puzzled. Aren't they all the same? Your father is too knowledgeable. How did he give birth to such a greedy goose like you who only knows how to steal food all day long? The old and experienced goat-horned girl punched him. The little chubby boy sat down in the snow. His eyes were moist. He wanted to cry but did not dare to. After a long while, the little chubby boy said in a sobbing voice, "I also wrote a poem this year." In the ancient Xianxia Academy, if these children of great scholars and writers could not write a few poems before the age of 10, they would be laughed at. The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, "You don't know shit. How can that be called a poem?" The little chubby boy wiped his tears and ran home to complain to his parents. The goat-horned girl sneered. Look, he's the same as that Qi Shens. He can't win in a quarrel or a fight, so he likes to ask his elders for help." The other children looked at each other, speechless. In the pavilion, Yu Wei looked at him and did not say anything. They met again after parting at the Spring God Lake. Su Fengnian took out a piece of paper from his sleeve. His first sentence was extremely unpleasant. He handed it to Master Yu, who was a teacher at the Xianxia Academy. "There's an old scholar called Lu Wenbao in the Xianxia Academy. He gave me some names. See if there are any familiar names. I don't really trust Lu Wenbao's comments. If there are any, tell me. If they are close to the truth, then I'll use peaceful means before resorting to force. Regardless of whether they are a 1,000-mile horse or a 100-mile donkey, I'll send them to Bailiang first. However, since Lu Wenbao has appointed them as generals, I reckon that they are all people with some knowledge. They would be happy to go to Bailiang and get an official position. As for the Grand Chancellor, go and tell him. If he can't bring himself to do it, it's okay. I'll go look for him myself later." Yu Wei asked calmly, "Are you done?" Su Fengnian nodded. She turned her head and said coldly, "Then His Royal Highness can leave." Su Fengnian was silent for the time it took for a stick of incense to burn. He said, "Okay," and walked out of the pavilion gently. The snow on his shoulders was white, but his hair was white. Chapter 8:19. There was a forest of merits and virtues in Xianxia Academy. Only Mr. Ji Shang could enter. Su Fengnian had studied the geography of the academy and was familiar with it. He thought that he would be stopped along the way, but when he entered the forest of monuments, it was lonely and only snow remained. His footsteps left a series of small pits in the snow, which were then covered by continuous snowflakes. Previously, he went to the small building by Lotus Lake where Second Sister stayed to study. He sat for a while and no one came to criticize him. Su Fengnian walked into the forest of monuments that recorded the merits of the ancestors. The monuments were of different sizes and most of the inscriptions were epitaphs. However, the graves were often not behind the monuments. The forest of monuments was like a different kind of history, quietly erected page by page in the back mountain of Xianxia Academy. Su Fengnian squatted down in front of an exceptionally small stone tablet and used his sleeve to wipe away the accumulated snow. The epitaph on the tablet had the charm of the great Qin dynasty. Su Fengnian looked up at the falling snow and picked a relatively majestic stone tablet to lean against. After an unknown amount of time, he opened his eyes and saw a petite figure in a straw raincoat staggering over. She held a bamboo basket covered in cotton in her arms and walked with great difficulty. When she passed by Su Fengnian, she was about to squat down when she seemed to have seen a pair of black eyes hanging in the air. She was so frightened that she fell on her butt. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the accumulated snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over her, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at the mysterious white-haired enemy. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang and her ancestral home was Takaoka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian originally thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. It was trivial and trivial. Su Fengnian stood up and shook off the snow on his body. With an apologetic expression, he reached out to pull the goat-horned girl up. He thought that the girl would walk straight over her, but he didn't expect her to stop in front of the stone tablet, causing her to suffer a false alarm. The goat-horned girl patted her chest and glared at her white-haired enemy who appeared and disappeared like a ghost. After Su Fengnian asked, he found out that the girl's surname was Ouyang and her ancestral home was Takaoka. The inscription on the tablet behind her was an elegy written by her father. Every time Su Weisheng read it, he would cry. Su Fengnian thought that the words were extraordinary, but after reading it, he realized that it was like a letter from home. Now that he was 20 years old, he encountered an unforeseen event. Now that he was helping the little girl wipe away the snow, he turned back to read the elegy. He actually pursed his lips, not daring to let the little girl see his face. She was still in her innocent years. When her ancestors passed away, she was not yet born, so naturally she did not feel too much pain. Growing up in the school, she was carefree. After she put down the basket, she started to mutter to herself. Su Fengnian then realized that today was her grandfather's death anniversary. This place was indeed a tomb. However, her parents had left for a long journey and had asked her to visit the tomb today. Unfortunately, an unexpected snowfall caused the little girl to suffer greatly. Along the way, she had cursed God countless times. It was not easy for the little girl to find someone who could talk. She spoke softly to the tombstone. Mr. Su, whom I admire the most, once said that my father's elegy was written from the bottom of his heart. Not a single word was deliberately added to the tomb. It was the best elegy. I don't really understand these things. I only feel that my father's elegy was simple and tranquil, just like when he was teaching. He could not speak of great principles. After so many years in the school, he did not teach many good students. If it were not for Master Su's good words for him, the family would not have been able to eat for a few years. The box that my mother used to store her dowry was getting emptier. When I was young, I could still secretly wear a lot of jade hairpins in my hair when my parents were not around. Now I can't. Su Fengnian laughed softly. You are still a child now. The goat-horned girl with the surname Ouyang rolled her eyes. Sometimes you have a poisonous mouth, as if you have eaten a green snake, centipede, or scorpion. You can make our first young master of the Qi family so angry, but you are also not good with words. How can you talk to a girl like that? I think you must have not gained anything from Sister Yu, right? The squatting Su Fengnian put his hands in his sleeves and crossed them in front of his chest. He smiled and said, I ate a green snake, centipede, and you ate a crow? The little girl was smart. She raised her fist and pretended to be fierce. You are the one who has a crow's mouth. Su Fengnian smiled and squinted his eyes. At this moment, his eyes seemed to be narrow and intelligent. His handsome face was filled with warmth. It was hard to imagine that this was the #1 playboy in Baoyang who was feminine and full of ruthlessness. The best way to train one's eyesight was to train one's Taoism skills. When other people were racking their brains to jump into the vat of officialdom, Su Fengnian had already seen all kinds of strange and variegated shows in the vat. Although the goat-horned girl beside him acted like a heroine, like the king of children, her clothes were thin. At this moment, the overly loose straw raincoat she was wearing was even more tattered. Her family background was obviously not as good as her peers by the Buddha's Palm Lake. In another 5 or 6 years, the children would know the power of the soft knives in the world. Perhaps they would be bullied by their childhood playmates instead. Although the Xianxia Academy had been a holy land for learning since ancient times, There were bound to be disputes when there were hundreds of schools of thought contending. For example, during the chaos of the spring and autumn period, the military school was at its peak. Even those who were just there to make up the numbers were snatched away by the spring and autumn period countries as heroes who could turn the tide. However, at that time, there was a wave of blind looting, and the countries really did pick up the scraps a few times. Now that the world was settled, the scene of scholars saving the country was no longer as grand as it used to be. Most of the scholars of Jishang and Jixia were dormant. It was inevitable that they would be entangled in daily necessities and seek personal gain. Lu Wenbao had recommended more than 10 people, but they were weak. Most of them were like this. They were depressed and did not achieve their goals. The goat-horned girl lifted the basket and asked, "Are you coming with me?" Su Fengnian shook his head. "I'm about to leave the academy." She frowned her delicate eyebrows that already had a pair of embryonic willow leaves. She lowered her head and looked at the bamboo basket. Poor children had to take care of the household early. The food in the basket should not be wasted. However, she had a small appetite. Although it was not easy to get sick in winter, after all, the food was warm and would spoil the taste. Of course, the main reason was that she felt that it was really boring to walk back 1 or 2 miles by herself. It was better to have someone to talk to on the way back than to be alone in the cold. Su Fengnian smiled. "If you don't mind me freeloading, I'll go with you." The goat-horned girl gracefully snapped her fingers and said the same witty catchphrase, "Approved." Chapter 8:20. Returning home in the wind and snow, the goat-horned girl was wearing a pair of fine brocade boots. However, as she had not changed them for many years, the satin fabric was so worn that it could not withstand the wind and rain. Walking from her home to the Dowd forest, she was nearly soaked in them. The young lady was vexed that she had been in a hurry to cook and had forgotten to change her shoes when she left the house. She was both distressed and remorseful. However, thinking that the new year was approaching and that her mother had promised to buy her a new pair of shoes in the first month of the lunar year, she was somewhat expectant. Su Fengnian took the bamboo basket and had her walk behind him. Having unexpectedly found a living person in the forest of steels, the little girl was in high spirits. She didn't have the taboo of speaking too much with a shallow acquaintance. Apart from introducing herself, she also talked about some old stories. She said that her grandfather was a great literary hero of the old northern Han who was untainted by the wind and had written splendid essays. However, on the eve of the country's destruction, he spoke a few words of fairness to a great general surnamed Su in the imperial court. As a result, he was removed from his position and almost had his head chopped off. When he arrived at the education palace, he lectured on the righteousness and benefit of the state and was also ostracized. The young lady was not afraid of exposing her shortcomings. Su Fengnian followed her to the small courtyard that she shared with several scholars of the Jishang dynasty. Most of the other chancellors of the academy also had a festive atmosphere in their windows. Only her house had a rack of grapes in front of it. After entering winter, there was no greenery, only vines, making it appear even more dismal. The young lady, on the other hand, was content and cheerful. Perhaps she had taken after her parents' temperament. As she walked past the rack of grapes, she raised her head and said with a smile, "You came at the wrong time. Summer is the best. Pick 2 or 3 bunches and place them in the Buddha's palm lake for 2 hours. They are so delicious that even the immortal peaches in heaven cannot compare to them. It's just that they attract mosquitoes at night." The goat-horned girl changed into a pair of boots and set up a stove. Placing the soaked boots beside the stove, she then went to uncover the pot to warm the food, allowing Su Fengnian to do as he pleased. He picked up a small stool and sat by the door. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see the corner of the young lady's boudoir. It was a small table and cabinet, simple and clean. The sky gradually darkened, but the reflection of the snow made it brighter than usual. The doors of the other houses in the courtyard were tightly shut to block out the wind and snow. Just as Su Fengnian was sizing her up, the door across from him opened with a squeak. The young child who had been thrown to the ground by the goat-horned girl earlier ran out. His lips were red and his teeth white. When he grew up, he would most likely be an elegant and charming scholar. But when the child saw the stranger who had angered Master Qi in the pavilion, he was a little timid. He stood at the door, not knowing whether to advance or retreat. A middle-aged man who was reading softly with an ancient scroll in his hand somehow came to the door. He followed his son's line of sight and saw Su Fengnian sitting on the stool. He thought for a moment, held the book with one hand behind his back, and stepped over the threshold. He approached the door of the Ouyang family and smiled, "Little wooden fish, do you have a guest?" The elegant man spoke politely and nodded at Su Fengnian with a smile. Su Fengnian also stood up and greeted politely, "Greetings to Mr. Jishang." This way of saying things was normal, but the advantage was that there would be no mistakes. Everyone in the court laughed that those who swept the floor and did odd jobs in the academy could be respectfully addressed as Mr. Outside. The goat-horned girl nicknamed Little Wooden Fish poked her head out of the kitchen and smiled, "Hello, Uncle Qin." After exchanging some pleasantries, Mr. Qin turned around and left. When he closed the door, the sound was slightly louder. Only then did the goat-horned girl snort. This fellow can be considered as Qi Shen's personal helper. Every now and then he would exchange poems. He has some knowledge, but he doesn't have any strength of character. These years he has earned quite a bit of money. Every now and then he would come to my house and say that he wants to move away. He says that it's better to be close to a neighbor, but every time he talks, he would say that he lives in a private residence not far from Grand Chancellor Wang. He's just showing off his family's wealth to my parents. Su Fengnian took the bowl of rice and chewed slowly. He raised his head and smiled at his little daughter who was eating while standing. "You have to see others doing well." The little girl rolled her eyes. "You're the only one with a lot of principles." Su Fengnian suddenly changed the topic and said with a naughty smile, "But when it comes to poems, other than giving them to friends, the people who do most of it are scholars and famous prostitutes in brothels. I don't know who is the prostitute between you, Uncle Qin, and first young master of Qi." The goat-horned girl blushed when she heard that, but her eyes were filled with heartfelt joy. She smiled and said, "You're so mean." After eating, the little girl patted her round tummy and burped in an unladylike manner. Su Fengnian took the bowl and chopsticks and was about to go to the kitchen when the goat-horned girl had a shocked expression as though she had seen an immortal or a ghost. Su Fengnian, who was holding the bowl and chopsticks with both hands, said with a smile, "Only a gentleman stays away from the kitchen. Do you think I look like one?" The little girl said with a pained expression, "Sister, you has really met the wrong person to meet you." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Yes." After slowly washing the bowl and chopsticks, Su Fengnian used his sleeve as a rag to dry his hands. The little girl sat by the stove and held her cheeks in a daze. Su Fengnian was still sitting on the small stool. The little girl glanced at the dense snow outside the door and sighed helplessly, "If it wasn't snowing, I would be able to count the stars at night. I can count to more than 1,000, isn't that amazing?" Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, "Amazing." The goat-horned girl curled her lips and said, "You're not sincere." Su Fengnian followed her and looked outside the door in silence. After a long time, he said softly, "When I was young, I heard the adults say that the starry sky at night is a big lantern full of fireflies." The little girl laughed and said, "When I see fireflies in summer, I kill them one by one." Su Fengnian glanced at the goat-horned girl who was laughing evilly. "Whoever marries you in the future will be unlucky." The little girl held her cheeks and said sadly, "That's right." At dusk, a thin old man slowly walked into the courtyard. He was wearing a green robe and hemp shoes, and there was a suet jade pendant hanging from his waist. There were thousands of people in the school. The goat-horned girl believed that she had a photographic memory, but she still didn't recognize this old man. Su Fengnian, however, knew him. He was a terrible chess player who thought that he was the top national chess player. Back then, at the top of Mount Qingliang, he was evenly matched with Su Xiao. He was good at reversing his moves, and Su Fengnian had a headache watching the game. However, this old man was his second sister's master, and he deserved to be called the number one person in the world who was good at chess. Under the side eye of the goat-horned girl, the old man casually sat down and asked shamelessly, "Little girl, do you still have food?" Although the little girl was shrewish, her upbringing was very good and strict. She stood up and smiled, "Sir, my family has food." Su Fengnian reached out and secretly took the jade pendant from the waist of the old man who had almost become the Grand Chancellor of the Xianxia Academy. He handed it to the little girl and said, "These are worthless scraps of white jade. Just take it as the payment for our meal." The old man's expression was normal. He nodded with a smile and didn't give the little girl a chance to refuse. "If you don't accept it, I won't eat it." The little girl shook her head hard and said seriously, "Can we not be so tacky?" Su Fengnian and Chancellor Wang looked at each other and smiled. Su Fengnian didn't return the jade pendant to the Chancellor. The latter waited for the little girl to go to the kitchen to cook and asked calmly, "I have 600 people. Do you dare to eat Baoyang?" Su Fengnian thought for a while. "There are only people who starve to death. I've never heard of people who eat to death." The old man shook his head and said in a low voice, "Not necessarily." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "It's hard to say if half of these people can reach Baoyang in the end. They won't eat to death in Baoyang." The old man nodded and said, "That's true." Chapter 8:21. The goat-horned girl was very considerate and didn't care that the two guests had stolen the limelight. Seeing that they looked like they were going to talk in the middle of the night, she lit up 2 thick red candles in the hall and went to her boudoir to flip through her books. The door was half closed and there was a small gap. She was willing to light up the lamp, so she secretly squatted by the door and read with the help of the faint light. The number of chancellors and teachers in Xianxia Academy were as many as the hairs on a cow, but there were only a few who could be evaluated as a master. Back then, Chancellor Wang won the debate between name and reality, lost the battle between heaven and man, and lost to the current Grand Chancellor of the Academy. In terms of weight, he was still ranked in the top 3 in the Academy. In terms of the talent of eloquence, no one could beat him. At this moment, Chancellor Wang bent over and stretched out his hand to warm himself by the fire on the stove. The light shone on his weathered face and he occasionally picked up a peanut from the bowl and threw it into his mouth. Su Fengnian sat on a small stool and carried the girl's favorite pair of brocade boots. He controlled the fire and roasted them slowly at a height away from the burning charcoal in the stove. In this way, no matter how prestigious their identities were, both of them had a rustic vibe and didn't look like clay bodhisattvas who were worshipped high above. The two of them didn't speak hastily even though the situation was urgent and could be said to be urgent. After all, the affairs of the world couldn't be discussed with one's hands and couldn't be regretted. Chancellor Wang was serious this time and his mood wasn't relaxed. Scholars only talked on paper and often had high standards but little ability. Chancellor Wang spent his whole life studying the art of maneuvering, but no matter how good the plan was, it still had to be done by people. Once a piece was placed on the chessboard, it couldn't be changed again. However, how could a living person be so simple? Who would be willing to be a puppet or a pawn to cross the river? This was also the root of Chancellor Wang's carelessness in playing chess. The chessboard and chess pieces were all dead objects. Otherwise, if he were to choose a talented person to govern the country, he could just casually pick a few famous national players. When the little girl who was hiding behind the door to read her book was flipping through the pages, she glanced at the white-haired man outside the door. She definitely couldn't hate him, but if she were to say that she liked him at the first awakening of love, she wouldn't. Firstly, she was still young, and secondly, in the matters between men and women, it wasn't as if the other person was good enough for her to like him. Love didn't start and end, who could say for sure what fate was? The goat-horn girl was influenced by her family of scholars and felt that she would still find a scholar like her father in the future. The warm and handsome guy in the hall outside the house was good, but unfortunately, he wasn't her cup of tea. The little girl didn't have any intention of eavesdropping, so she withdrew her thin thoughts and subconsciously dipped her finger in her saliva. She gently flipped through the book and put it in her mouth before smacking it. Her mouth was filled with the fragrance of ink, and she laughed to herself. Her parents always said that this habit of hers wasn't good, that it wasn't easy to collect books, and that it was detestable to destroy books. However, how could this little girl care about these things? She wouldn't change even after repeated admonishment. In the hall, Chancellor Wang finally opened his mouth slowly. "Don't think about victory, think about defeat first. Let's talk about the worst." Among the 600 people, the teachers and scholars are roughly divided into 2 and 8. Among them, a small half of the scholars from Xianxia have been sent by me to study and lecture in Old Shu, Jizhou, Xiangfan and other places using various excuses. Half of the teachers from Xianxia have opened private academies within 800 miles of Beiliang or have attached themselves to the local dignitaries. It's relatively easy for these people to enter Beiliang, but we can't rule out the possibility that the imperial court is secretly watching them. Once there's any movement, the imperial court will kill them and eliminate them. If these people are like this, don't even talk about those who are studying in the palace. The relationship between the Su and Zhao families has been exhausted. With such a large-scale migration, not to mention the difficulties of the prefectures and counties along the way, even Zhuge might be mobilized. This bunch of teachers and scholars who are not much better than delicate girls can't withstand a few trampling of iron hooves. To put it bluntly, a slightly elite Liang soldier can pick out a stick of candied haw with a thrust of his spear. Your Highness said that less than half of them have arrived in Beiliang. It's not an exaggeration to scare people. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "We'll deal with whatever comes our way." The Liang cavalry and Zhuge, who are experts in assassination, are used to eating meat, but are our Beiliang's secret agents vegetarians? When we were eating meat with big bowls back then, weren't they still eagerly waiting to drink soup on the side? My Sherfu once specifically left a brocade pouch for us to deal with this matter, and now we've already begun to launch countermeasures. The geographical advantage is in Liang, but the weather, people, and peace are two different things. Although we can't say that it's all in Beiliang, it's still a bit better than the difficult situation of the past few years. First of all, when Beiliang dispatched troops to raid several towns on the border of Beimang, Second Sister even led troops to kill all the way to the capital of the southern dynasties, making Beimang exhausted from dealing with them. Then there was the devil Luo Yang who spent a year brazenly going south last year, luring and killing countless iron cavalry and elite troops. Beiliang raised a large number of Jianghu dogs. In the past, they were used to guard against the infiltration of Beimang's Jianghu forces to the south, for fear that this group of desperados would not kill the heavily guarded powerful officials and meritorious deeds. They specifically selected the soft persimmons who were only at the threshold of the ranked class to assassinate them. Now, they could be transferred to Liang's borders. If Beimang dared to loot a burning house and tried to form a tacit understanding with the Zhao family, then they would let Su Shao fight again. Coincidentally, the newly appointed Protector General of Beiliang, Chu Lushan, and the cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong were both worrying about how to deal with the new officials. If Beimang were to be implicated, even Zhong Hongwu and Yan Wenwan would be happy to see it happen. Moreover, Zhuge of Liang had ruthlessly killed a number of the top spies in Zhuge when Chao Chongqing was welcoming the princess. Now, it had not recovered its strength. Beiliang's death warriors were not good at fighting in battle formations, but they were still good at this kind of covert operations. If they were to fight Zhuge, they would barely not be at a disadvantage. Also, those elite death warriors who spent too much energy and effort to protect me can also be sent to coordinate with the military spies that Beiliang has long since established. Don't forget, the Beiliang cavalry is the best in the world mainly because of the scouts. If the Zhao family and the imperial court fall out with each other and do not hesitate to send more than 1,000 soldiers, then they can't blame them for kicking an iron plate. The old man sighed. When the time comes, this chessboard will be a scene of intersecting fangs. The old man withdrew his hands that were burned by the stove fire and rubbed his thin cheeks. Maybe there will be blood everywhere. Chapter 8:22. Su Fengnian said calmly, "You can't ask for a horse carriage but not feed the horse. There's no such good thing in the world. My Su family doesn't rebel or usurp the throne. We guard the northwest gate for your Zhao family. Ordinary people raise a dog to guard their house and still know how to give food. Zhao family, on the other hand, thinks all day long about this dog whose only weakness is that it doesn't know how to wag its tail and beg for mercy. They quickly starve its fur and bones and then find a good time to stew a pot of dog meat and eat to their heart's content. Even a cornered dog knows how to jump over a wall, let alone the Beiliang cavalry that rolled out of blood." Su Fengnian suddenly smiled and put down the girl's old boots that he had already roasted. He used an iron tongs to poke at the charcoal fire. "However, if I were the son of Zhao or the crown prince, I would also be on tenterhooks towards the Su family. How can I allow others to snore beside my bed? It's just that understanding is one thing, but if you want me to accept it, it's absolutely impossible. The old man smiled knowingly and no longer called Su Fengnian your highness. He became more intimate. You brat, your words are quite reasonable, but your actions are skewed. Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. It's not easy to be the head of the household. Children who make noise get candy. If you don't make a scene and roll around a few times, how can other people take you seriously? Chancellor Wang chuckled. Then how can it be even better? Su Fengnian followed suit and his eyebrows became more relaxed. He laughed heartily. Speaking of this makes me feel better. Unexpectedly, the old man shook his head. I have to pour cold water on you first. Let's assume that more than half of the 600 people will make it to Bailiang alive. Have you ever thought about what will happen when there are too many monks and too little porridge? All the scholars in the world are watching how Bailiang will settle these people down. Bailiang's land is narrow and barren. Although there are many official hats, they can't be given away casually. If you give away too many, the official hats won't be worth anything. After you've settled down, no one will be willing to continue working hard for you. Besides, the local forces in Bailiang had their roots intertwined, and most of them were military families that emerged from the Spring and Autumn War. When a dispute arose, who would they side with? Blindly favoring someone was destined to be inhumane. Those who were favored grew more and more greedy, while those who were neglected grew jealous and resentful. The most difficult part about this was that it wasn't just the blood-stained military affairs that were annoying, it was also the trivial family affairs that were disgusting. I know that after you took over Qinjibao, you began to deliberately change the image of a foppish young master in Bailiang. Especially that group of veteran soldiers who have been through hundreds of battles changed their opinion of you. It was not easy. Aren't you afraid that this time, when you set up your own school and enter Bailiang, your efforts will be in vain? Scolding you for being an embroidered pillow who squanders money? Su Fengnian smiled and said, as a married woman, the happiest thing in life is not only being able to see eye to eye with your husband, but also two things that are extremely important. The father-in-law is impartial, and the mother-in-law is considerate. Bailiang is thirsty for talented people, but there are many fine horses, but there aren't many Bolu. Without the hundreds of people from Shangyin School, didn't the Su family gain a firm foothold in Bailiang? Didn't they beat Beimeng until Beimeng couldn't raise its head? As for the local tyrants of Bailiang, there are many things that Su Shao can't do. I don't mind being the bad guy at all. You have a good relationship with Su Shao, and you rely on this relationship to take advantage of the common people in Bailiang. But you don't have that kind of relationship with me, Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian didn't rely on them to get to where he is today. I'm not biased towards anyone. I'm just trying to reason with the local tyrant and the river dragon. Outside of northern Liang, I might not be able to reason with you. But in northern Liang, if you don't reason with me, I'll make sure you suffer the consequences of your actions. If you're a local tyrant, then you can rely on your military exploits to become rich field shuang or control the military affairs of various provinces and counties. It doesn't matter, these are all things you deserve. However, your table manners are too bad, and you've damaged the foundation of the Su family's wall. A hoe here and a hammer there dug dog holes, causing a perfectly sturdy wall to leak air from all sides. Don't blame me for using your corpses to fill the holes. If you are a local tyrant, as long as you don't pretend to be virtuous and do things honestly, you will have an official's hat, gold and silver, and you won't lack women. Bailiang's narrow territory also has its advantages, and that is, everywhere you go is under the Su family's nose. Everything you do can be seen. What the Su family does is nothing more than the word justice. As for the earnest advice, I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you, old teacher. I think you will also be cursed behind your back. Chancellor Wang nodded and said, with justice and a woman's heart, this bunch of pitiful newlyweds who have lost their maternal families. As long as they are diligent and thrifty, they won't have to worry about not being able to make a name for themselves. There will definitely be bumps and bruises, but at least they won't be so miserable that they have to hang themselves and jump into a well. That's enough. They aren't delicate young ladies from influential families. As long as they have good in-laws who put themselves in their shoes, they will be able to endure hardships. Su Fengnian smiled and joked. The first time I saw old teacher playing against Su Xiao at the top of Mount Qingliang, your words were refined. It's probably because you are interacting with a vulgar person like me that your words are also vulgar. Old teacher shook his head and said self-deprecatingly, this is called choosing the right medicine for the illness depending on the person. Interacting with the king of Bailiang, the #1 boorish man in Liang, if I deliberately try to worm my way into being friends with him, I will have to deliberately put my arm around his shoulder and drink a lot of wine and eat a lot of meat. Wouldn't that make things difficult for this old man? Besides, the reason why the art of vertical and horizontal is also called the art of long and short is nothing more than using one's strong points against the enemy's weak points. Speaking of which, I would like to be bold enough to test His Royal Highness. What are the strengths and weaknesses of Bailiang and Liang? Su Fengnian said helplessly, Old teacher, you will have to ask Su Beiji or Chen Shiliang about this. I am not willing to expose my own weak points. Does this count as grasping the surface of the art of long and short? Chancellor Wang gave a soft hum. Su Fengnian asked softly, this young lady's surname is Ouyang. Her grandfather's surname is Ouyang. He is from Takaraka. Has old teacher heard of him? Chancellor Wang said calmly, the young lady's father is half a student of mine. He doesn't think highly of Bailiang, so he won't follow her to Bailiang. Su Fengnian nodded. That was good too. Xianxia Academy had suffered such a big change. In order to calm the people down, the academy and the imperial court would definitely have a better life in the future with the knowledge of the goat-horned girl's father. Su Fengnian stood up. Then let's go. Chancellor Wang stood up and smiled. Aren't you going to say goodbye? Su Fengnian smiled. That girl hates tacky people. The two of them walked out of the house quietly. After Su Fengnian closed the door, he hung the jade pendant that he had stolen on the way on the grape rack. On the second day, the wind and snow stopped. A huge snowman that was as tall as a few people stood beside the Buddha's Palm Lake in Xianxia Academy. The goat-horned girl ran all the way to Yuewei's courtyard and screamed excitedly, Sister Yu, there is a huge snowman beside the lake. It looks like you. Chapter 8:23. A group of strange travelers appeared on the road. 8 of them were carrying a palanquin that was neither a bed nor a couch. It was similar to the palanquin used by the royal family of the old southern Tang Empire. A wide gauze canopy was added to the top of the palanquin. Vaguely, one could see the graceful figure of a woman behind the palanquin. She was an extremely seductive beauty. In front of the palanquin was a beautiful ceremonial official dressed in green. She was holding an ivory palanquin. Tied around her waist was a bag of golden silk fish made in the old southern Tang Empire. She seemed to be walking slowly, but in fact, she was gliding rather quickly. The 8 servants were unusually burly and walked as if they were flying. Even in the winter, they were bare-chested. Compared with the young and delicate ceremonial official, they were even more eye-catching. Beside the palanquin was a middle-aged machete man with a black veil on his head. His beard was so long that it was almost impossible for him to be so arrogant. On the official road, most of the people who dared to be so ostentatious were high-ranking officials and dignitaries. If they were Wulian people, then they would be extraordinary. Today's Jianghu was divided by the so-called heroes. Compared to the martial artists of the spring and autumn period, they could not be mentioned in the same breath. Even the top sect of Jianghu, Dragon Tiger Mountain, which had the same surname as the emperor, was in the wilderness and Prime Minister Xianxia was in the court. The north and south were in harmony with each other, but they did not dare to be arrogant. This group of people was so maverick that they attracted a lot of attention on the road. Among them was a pair of young palanquins who had just met each other. They rode their horses separately. The older palanquin was riding an inferior horse. He reined in the horse to make way for them. With an envious face, he whispered to his companion, Look, they must be like us. They are going to participate in the martial arts assembly at the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. If I'm not wrong, they should be the second to Nun Dragon Palace in the old southern Tang Empire. Only they dare to show such an overstepping and violating etiquette. They have no choice. The palace master of the Dragon Palace is the wet nurse of the youngest son of the king of Yanqi. With the support of such a powerful vassal king in the dynasty, even the Jadushi who held the Tiger Tally in the southern Tang Empire would not say anything. I heard that this generation of the Dragon Palace has a talented woman. Hey, if she takes a fancy to me, my life will be worth it. Not to mention her, any of the fairies in the Dragon Palace would do. Huang Liang's companion was a young, white-haired nobody. Huang Liang was poor, and he was not a generous man. He did not manage to earn any money this year, so he was living a poor life. Earlier, he met this young man drinking alone in a small town. He shamelessly asked Huang Liang to bring him along, and when he heard that a martial arts assembly was going to be held at Snowfast Mountain Villa, he asked Huang Liang to bring him along. Huang Liang did not have to worry about food and drink along the way, and was lucky enough to stay in a first-class room in a few luxurious inns. Therefore, he began to see Su Qi in a new light. To be precise, he was impressed by Su Qi's wealth, and in his heart he still regarded this generous man as a fool. Huang Liang was happy to consider himself an experienced Jianghu veteran, and showed him some of the Jianghu stories he had heard. At this time, when he saw Su Qi's confused face after hearing about the Dragon Palace and the King of Yen, it confirmed his view of this kid as a newborn calf. He took off the wine bag that Su Qi bought with money from his waist, raised his head and took a big gulp. Then he wiped it with his sleeve and said with a smile, "If you haven't heard about the Dragon Palace, then I'll have to explain it to you. In the Jianghu world of Liang, not to mention the Dragon Tiger Mountain, the Wu family, the Sword Tomb, and the two Zen temples, which came out of the secular world at will, are too far away from Jianghu. The real first-class schools that can be called the peak of Jianghu are the Sword Pool of Dongyue, the Bull Gang of the Xinyuan family, the Wild Goose Castle on the border of Jizhou, the Spring Invitation Cottage in western Shu, and then the Dragon Palace and the Quick Snow Mountain Villa. As for the third-class schools and gangs, most of them are influential figures in a province. It's not very nice to say that they are third-class, but they can't be underestimated. Generally, they have one or two grandmasters as their stabilizing force. There's no need to talk about the fourth-class and the bottom-class sections. I was once valued by a big shot in the Pure Heart Pavilion, which was one of the best in the county. He saw that I had a good foundation and was expected to be a direct disciple. Unfortunately, I was snatched away by a government official who wanted to practice martial arts. That bastard is not serious about practicing martial arts. He's just a dog in the latrine pit. Apart from hurting a few senior and junior sisters, he doesn't show up in the sect more than a few times a year. Chapter 824. As expected, the young chick beside him, who had just entered Jianghu and did not know the dangers of Jianghu, looked indignant, as if he wanted to fight for justice for Huang Liang. This made Huang Liang, who was wearing a heavy expression, laugh inwardly. It was true, and Pure Heart Pavilion was a famous sect in Jianghu, but that person was not Huang Liang. He had heard from the gossip of the people in the city that the young man who was swapped had a miserable end. He had only said a few angry words, but his hands and feet were broken by a group of retainers on the same day. It was also in this harsh winter that he was thrown to the roadside like a dead dog. Su Qi, or Su Fengyan, looked up and saw the 8-barreled palanquin flying away like a swan treading on the snow. After leaving Shangyin Academy, Su Fengyan did not go with Chancellor Wang. However, with Yuan Zuozong in the light and Chu Lushan in the dark, there should not be any mistakes. If there was no accident, this was probably the last time he had the mood to wander around Jianghu. Su Fengyan wanted to return to Bailiang alone, so he did not even bring Wu, the man of sacrifice, with him, which made him very sad when he parted. According to Huang Liang, Jianghu was finally annoyed and no longer lifeless. The reason was that the Dongyue Sword Pool, which had a high status among the first-class sects, took the lead and the Spring Invitation Cottage of Western Shu agreed. They asked the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to be the host, intending to choose a person who could convince the masses to sit on the throne of the Wulin Alliance that had been vacant for decades. The reappearance of the Devil Cult, the emergence of their disciples and grand-disciples, and Mad Monk's journey to the east, had gradually caused the entire Jianghu to show signs of magnificence. Su Fengyan did not look at the ripples on the water, wondering if the Dongyue Sword Pool and the Spring Invitation Cottage had been instructed by the imperial court to imitate Bailiang and start to reorganize the forces in Jianghu. Dongyue Sword Pool had been the imperial court's dog-beating stick for years, beating anyone who was not convinced. After Chen Zhibao entered Shu, the Spring Invitation Cottage had been flirting with each other openly. Now that Chen Zhibao was the Minister of War and would be crowned king in 2 years, it was reasonable for them to be restless. While Su Fengnian was lost in thought, the ceremonial officer of Dragon Palace who was holding the tablet turned around and walked toward him. Her footsteps were light and agile, leaving no trace on the ground. In the eyes of ordinary Jianghu people, it would be feared. In Jianghu, old monks, old Taoists, and old nuns would not provoke them if they could. Moreover, the beautiful woman in green in front of him was outstanding. Since she dared to enter Jianghu, especially those heroines who fought alone, she must have some strange martial art skills. The graceful and moving woman held a plain white elephant tablet with both hands and bowed to Su Fengnian. She did not look like a woman from a poor family from an aristocratic family who curtsied. Indeed, it was in line with her ceremonial official attire, as if she was a courtier greeting each other. When she raised her head, the corners of her mouth lifted slightly. She looked at Su Fengnian, who was riding on the horse, and said in a pleasant voice, "My family's miss invites you to the imperial carriage for a chat." Huang Liang opened his mouth in surprise. His heart was filled with jealousy, and his mood immediately became gloomy. When a Jianghu man with no family background married into a prestigious sect and brought home a beautiful woman and countless secret manuals, most of them would not find it shameful. Instead, they would regard it as a wonderful thing. For example, drunken sword Zhao Hongden married into a rich family and brought home a beautiful woman, like a rootless duckweed planted in a fertile garden. His sword cultivation had improved by leaps and bounds. Without hesitation, Su Fengnian dismounted from the horse and led it away. Huang Liang wanted to rise to the top like he always did when the beautiful ceremonial officer took a step forward and shook her head. This made Huang Liang, who had just dismounted from the horse, want to dig a hole and hide in it. Fortunately, Su Qi, who had stepped on dog poop, did not turn his head, and the beautiful woman did not ridicule him. Instead, she turned and led the way. The palanquin stopped quietly at the side of the road. The beautiful ceremonial officer squatted in front of the palanquin and stretched out her hand. She looked up and signaled Su Fengnian to step on her hand, and she would help him enter the palanquin. Su Fengnian smiled and shook his head. He just handed the reins to her and asked, "The soles of my shoes are a little dirty. Is it okay to dirty your lady's tent?" The beautiful ceremonial officer, who was leading the horse with one hand and holding the tablet with the other, smiled gently and said, "It's okay. After you enter the tent, I'll help you take off your shoes." The bearded man frowned. He held the saber in his hand and stared at Su Fengnian covetously. Su Fengnian faced the gauze tent, cupped his fist and said, "Su Fengnian has disturbed fairy." She then tiptoed and slipped into the gauze curtain. The woman was in her 30s and had a dignified appearance. However, even though she was kneeling on the ground, one could still vaguely see that her legs were long and slender. The side of her round buttocks that were squeezed out from her kneeling posture were even more alluring. Only an old flower expert would know the uniqueness of a woman's figure. Seeing Su Fengnian enter the tent, the woman smiled politely and gracefully. She quietly added a piece of spice into a thick, glazed green porcelain stove beside her. Su Fengnian did not bother the ceremonial officer to take off his shoes. Instead, he took them off himself. The ceremonial officer had already put away the tablet and handed Su Fengnian's horse to the bearded man. She took the strange man's boots with both hands. There was no difference on her pretty face. The incense burner was slightly tipsy, which was originally used for lavender to avoid filth. Su Fengnian took off the hook and let down the gauze curtain. He sat cross-legged with the fairy of the Dragon Palace. She did not speak. Su Fengnian glanced at the incense burner out of the corner of his eye. The incense burner was painted with pictures of swords. Under the fragrance, the porcelain surface flowed like a lake, like a lifelike picture of a swordsman wielding his sword. This incense burner was vaguely a superior swordsmanship manual. Su Fengnian smiled knowingly. Jianghu people said that the Dragon Palace had all kinds of treasures and was as rich as a country. They were once a big parasite of the old southern Tang. The woman, who might have been a married woman, smiled and asked, "Do you also practice swordsmanship?" Su Fengnian nodded and said, "Yes, I have. May I know why Fairy asked me to take the carriage?" The woman stared at Su Fengnian and said calmly, "Do you know a prophecy left by the first-generation founder of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "My knowledge is shallow. I don't know." The woman did not mind and said, "It's hard to paint the skin but not the bones. You may know the face but not the heart. Our Dragon Palace has always been famous for drawing tigers and dragons. We are also good at observing people's bones." Su Fengnian spouted nonsense. "When I was young, the fortune-teller said that I would either become a hero or be hacked to death by a hero in the future. He estimated that my bone structure was not bad." "Fairy, how could you tell from so far away?" "Then Fairy of the Dragon Palace, you really have the ability of an immortal." The woman was obviously otherworldly. She was not used to such vulgar words and did not know how to respond. For a moment, there was only the fragrance and the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Chapter 8:25. Su Fengnian did not intend to pretend to be deaf and mute all the way to the Snow Villa. He smiled and said, "I have never heard of the words of the founder of the Dragon Palace, but I have heard that the Dragon Palace has a treasure called the Black Flower Cloud Dragon Pattern Sensor. It symbolizes the eternal stability of the Southern Tang dynasty. Its outer wall is covered with black and purple spots. Once it is put into the sensor and it burns, the mist will rise and the image of 9 dragons coming out of the sea will appear." Upon hearing this, the woman smiled. Her appearance was not eye-catching, but it set off her classical temperament and made her even more outstanding. She said softly, "Young Master Su is indeed the son of an official. Ordinary landowning households would not know of this Southern Tang's treasure." Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Is the Dragon Palace competing for the position of the Wulin Alliance?" The woman asked, "Young Master, do you think the Dragon Palace is qualified to compete for the Jianghu?" Su Fengnian waved his hand and said self-deprecatingly, "I don't dare to criticize." The woman was bending down to pick up the censer with copper chopsticks. She paused and glanced at Su Fengnian. After putting it into the censer, she seemed to have nothing to say. When Su Fengnian staggered and fell to the ground, she, who had been quietly holding her breath, waved her hand slightly to disperse some of the fragrance. She changed from kneeling to squatting. Her 2 fingers stopped at the tip of Su Fengnian's nose. She said to herself, "You even know that the black flower censer secretly came from the Southern Tang Imperial Palace to the Dragon Palace. How can you not know that our sect is good at making human skin puppets with suitable bone structure? You should know that one of the 4 grandmasters, Fu Jianghongjia, was born in the Dragon Palace." The woman stared at Su Fengnian's face and sneered, "You are really calm." While speaking, her 2 fingers were like the tip of a sword and her fingertips were like the tip of a sword. She fiercely poked Su Fengnian's eyes. Her fingertips were not too far away from his eyelids, but the man still did not move. The woman said, "Did he really faint?" The woman who did not retract her fingers had a flash of ruthlessness in her eyes. Just as her killing intent was flowing, Su Fengnian was still lying, but one hand held the woman's fingers and the other hand was strangling her neck. The woman was stunned. The first 2 probing was just a pretense. The 3rd time was the real killing intent. For the Dragon Palace, a good skin was priceless. No matter whether the man on the ground fainted or not, it did not stop her killing intent. The cat and mouse play. The cat and mouse. Su Fengnian opened his eyes and stared at the fairy of the Dragon Palace with a vicious heart. He chuckled softly and said, "You really want to kill me? I have given you a chance to be the compassionate Guanyin. It is good for us to meet by chance and love each other." The woman was speechless. Her eyes were full of horror. A few small red snakes slowly slithered on the arm of the man with a head full of white frost. Then they suddenly pierced into her arm like a glutton. The gentle woman who was originally covered with the water vapor of the south of the Yangtze River quickly withered. When Su Fengnian let go of her, she had already silently stopped breathing. He supported her leaning body with one hand and gently tapped her temples with the other. He slowly tore off a delicate mask. Under the mask was the face of the blue-green ceremonial official who walked in front of the 8 palanquins. After a long illness, he became a doctor. He had used a lot of masks that were related to witchcraft during his trip to Beimang. He was not a layman when it came to the art of disguise. Su Fengnian threw away the face that was equivalent to the rooting level of Shu Xiu. After laying the body flat, he picked up the spatula and skillfully scraped off some incense ashes. When it came to pretending to be cultured, what was he not good at as the son of Bailiang? Su Fengnian turned his head and casually glanced at this ceremonial official, with the southern Tang-style silk fish hanging from his waist. The latter was indifferent to the corpse. His smile did not diminish and his eyes were playful. Su Fengnian asked, "Who is she? Or you?" The blue-green lady stretched out a finger and stroked her temples. She squinted her eyes and said softly, "She is the current me. My real appearance is uglier than the one you took off. I don't dare to show my face to others." Su Fengnian put back the spatula. The mysterious lady said straightforwardly, "Originally, I thought that the journey to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa was boring and I wanted to make a new puppet to relieve my boredom. Now I feel that it is too wasteful. Why don't you come to the Dragon Palace and be a tripod furnace? Many men in Jianghu dream of it. Although it will dry up and be abandoned in 3 to 5 years, it is still much better than being made into a human skin puppet. Most of the women in the Dragon Palace are as beautiful as flowers and jade. They sing every night and enjoy happiness for several years. Even if you are a pewter spearhead, you can still have fun with 20 or 30 fairies. It is better than living a boring life with 1 or 2 old women." Su Fengnian said helplessly, "Miss, where does your confidence come from?" The lady tilted her head and asked, "Are you the emperor of Liang's family?" Su Fengnian shook his head. The lady asked again, "Have you reached the 1st grade of Vajra realm, or have you comprehended the mystery of finger mystery?" Su Fengnian still shook his head. The lady asked, "Then are you the son-in-law of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu or Gu Jiantang?" Su Fengnian was amused. He laughed and said, "Are you done asking?" The 8 palanquins sank a few feet in an instant. The 8 strong and burly retainers knelt down almost at the same time. Su Fengnian's left hand grabbed the lady's face like hooks. The lady's face was bleeding. His right hand slowly rotated and several flying swords were nailed into her vital acupoints. If she dared to use qi to resist, she would be nailed to death on the spot. Su Fengnian slightly increased the strength of his 5 fingers. Perhaps the lady's face was covered with blood and she was gasping for breath. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Do you really think you are invincible just because of the fake Vajra secret skill of the Dragon Palace?" The reason why the Dragon Palace was able to stand tall was because of the snake entangling tortoise, which was derived from the red armor of the Talisman General, and a few shortcut Xian finger skills. In the end, it was neither a donkey nor a horse. It was a laughingstock. How many genuine level 1 masters would take these women seriously? If you want to be a master like Wang Xinji, you can't do it with the unorthodox methods of the Dragon Palace. In the past, your palace master tried to give herself to Wang Xinji to take Yang to nourish Yin. As a result, she was slapped into a pulp by old monster Wang before she could take off her clothes. In my opinion, if a lady is too ugly, she shouldn't be in Jianghu. The lady gnashed her teeth and said, "Who are you? Why do you know so much about the secrets of the Dragon Palace?" Su Fengnian loosened his 5 fingers and smiled without saying a word. The lady, who was decisive, shouted outside the gauze tent, "Keep going." The lady, who was waiting for an opportunity to reward the white-haired young man with a mystery of finger skills, spat out a mouthful of blood without warning. It turned out that a flying sword had penetrated her body. The green flying sword circled back to its master's fingers. Su Fengnian sneered, "Still not giving up?" The lady stuck out her tongue to lick away the blood and swallowed it along with her saliva. Her eyes were cold and she said in a charming tone, "What a good sword manipulation art of the Wu family's sword tomb." Su Fengnian pointed at his white hair and said with a smile, "Based on this and the turmoil in Great Peace City, you actually guessed my identity but didn't dare to say it? Afraid that I would kill you?" The lady was silent. Su Fengnian asked directly. This time, the Dragon Palace went to the Quick Snow Mountain Villa to join in the fun. Did the king of Yanqi, Zhao Bing, and Nalan Yusi ask you to do anything? The lady was expressionless. She seemed to have accepted her fate and was waiting for death. The two of them were only a few feet apart. Su Fengnian changed his attitude faster than flipping the pages of a book. He slapped his palm on her forehead. The woman's body was strangely still. Only her head shook for a long time. Blood flowed out of her 7 orifices. The concealed qi that she had gathered with great difficulty suddenly burst out. She covered her mouth. Scarlet blood seeped out from between her fingers and dripped onto the carpet. Su Fengnian slapped the lady's face with his right hand. Her head swayed to the left. She tried to move to the right because she could clearly feel a flying sword with undisguised cold sword energy hovering near her right ear. She did not want to have her head pierced by a sword for no reason, but Su Fengnian hit her when she was down. After the slap, he pressed his hand against her swollen cheek and pushed it towards the tip of the flying sword. This caused the resilient lady's heart to die in that instant. Her life was hanging by a thread. It was not a good feeling to be so close. The lady closed her eyes. The man's palm was warm, but the flying sword near her ear was cold and piercing. The tip of the sword happened to touch her temple. A drop of blood slowly flowed down her pretty cheek. After opening her eyes, she sneered, "Why? Are you worried that the secret skill of the Dragon Palace will die with me once I crush the pearl?" Su Fengnian flicked his finger on her cheek. The flying sword returned to his sleeve. He said casually, "The ladies of the Dragon Palace are like clams. Their cultivation varies. The pearls they cultivate are also different in size. The small pearls are as small as a grain of rice. They follow the flow of qi. The big pearls